associates. And so he was stopped by the county council, and he was bringing his Ferrari. It was like in the mix. He was driving every time.
Obsessed with something else.
I remember when that was my job for public. It's receiving cars and lining them up and making sure that they were those drivers would drive their cars and it was like it was amazing.
My dad was a partner in automotive and he was fix the old vintage cars. Yeah, he had, so I grew up in the 1960s Cadillac. Coupe de my father got it from my mother.
That's just so
Seats had the electronic thing for
fancy stuff.
yeah, so I'm being chauffeured to elementary school and like that, this white Cadillac with little kids. So he had like a 55 Chevy,
It's so good. You can get it.
Chevy, yeah, all these classic cars. Unfortunately, he got rid of them. But he had the opportunity to get 1957 people from his friend.
Yeah.
And he should have got it because it didn't work.
No.
There was one there.
Yeah.
There's a car that looked almost like a 57 Jeep.
Yeah.
It's like time travel.
It's a concept car for price now.
I don't know how
Like everybody's
Yeah, but
Back to the Future was
He is right now for 2.5. Nicely conditioned. All
one of my favorite movies.
Those compared to the T-Bird and the Firebird. And they had the poor little window, poor window. Everyone preferred the T-Bird.
That was amazing.
Especially
So excited.
Well,
How old were you then?
I was young.
Then they had those T-Birds with suicide doors. I remember the 1960 something, 70 something. Oh my
God.
Yeah, so that was like
60
yeah. They copied Continental.
I remember the Continental.
Yeah, the T-Bird. It was the longest.
Because I think
Yeah.
Green Hornet and Cato had that kind of
Yeah. Suicide doors.
But it was pretty fast.
Yeah, we're done talking about cars.
We had good weather and we had a little bit of money.
Daddy took the T-Bird
You ever
away.
heard of a car called a Koenigsegg?
No.
It's a step up from a Lexus.
Yeah?
Yeah, called 4 million.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I heard that.
They're all, they can't make them faster than they're all pretty soon. They're at the dealership, the Lamborghini dealership, and they can't even keep on the stock. Because everything is already in order. So we have to go and order it from the dealer. Someone is selling, buying a car for $4 million that they never touched.
Of course, with that price, like, they're just trying to give away money.
But if they don't want that, they can settle for a guy.
So what I hear is all y'all should set out tables outside that dealership. Yeah, if you're gonna be like, you know, at least throw a little, yes, yeah. And then you can know you're doing good with your investment.
That's a different
Oh,
world.
yeah.
I think only Jay Leno was in that world.
Yeah, no, I don't see those cars. Yeah, I had a, when I was in UCLA, I had a 1970 something Opel GT, really cool. And I was going to totally restore it. And I never had a chance, but I wanted to. Because it was the one that had the original.
It's okay.
But then it went to extremely soft.
That's why I was like, I wanted to do it on a day that I could
Racing
yeah.
It was like, I flew out 2 winters ago, and my dad said, no.
But you just use very first. I mean, if there is another time where
Yeah, there was the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
now, like the last day, that would be great. Okay, I'll talk to you. The panel was so nice. We had, I saw that, yeah. And then would have been like round yeah, but it still was a great conversation. I totally understand.
Karen pictures for us. Don't worry about it.
This year they teach Studebaker. There was a guy who entered Studebaker. No body, no chassis. He won like best.
What's going on? There's a that they don't for rusting and stuff. They do them like that. They won't like sand them down.
The guy had a Jaguar. He was in the process of restoring it, but it wasn't complete. It didn't engine purr like it did. And he was still. They turned the cars away.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
How was everybody's Valentine's Day? Amazing.
Early night.
Early night.
Early round to my Valentine was on.
Oh, was it? Nice. Well, let's go ahead and jump in it today. We're going to talk about the last two sections of the fundraising strategic plan first. And so just kind of wraps that whole strategic planning portion of the organizational structure together so that, you know, the students that we have in the class that are working with some of you guys, you know, they have that last part to kind of put the stamp on the end on the strategy and the planning component. And then we're going to talk about the next two sections of the cost selling cycle, which is the presentation and handling objections. And then hopefully we're going to have a great speaker today. Tony Bell from the Stanford Institute of Philanthropy will be here to talk with you guys. And then hopefully we'll get some good time for you to split off and really work on your pitches, since we have a couple more weeks before everybody will get up here and show us what you got. Right. Any questions about the last couple of weeks or last week's session or no?
Do we all have to go talk up there?
Yes.
What are we just doing a spiel about our organization?
So that handout that I've given you a couple of times, that it's not this one, but it looks like this one, and it says practice your pitches.
Yeah.
So that gives you the foundation of kind of what you want to do. But yeah, so we started off with more, and then you're just kind of whittling it down to your, and I'll email it out to everybody again today, after class today, so that you, yeah.
Thank you so
Now,
much.
I'm glad I said, and you will be standing up here to do it, so everybody's like, what?
Right, there won't be
Now. Yes.
And when is that?
Last day.
Should we position it as like a conversational, like, because as I'm thinking of it, it's like, do I say, have you ever been to Flamingo Gardens? Or is it more presentation style?
It's almost like your elevator speech.
Okay.
You know, like for
To
somebody that,
one-on-one.
yes. So, you know, you're just kind of fine tuning that, you know, to talk about your why and then as if somebody doesn't know your organization.
Okay. Have a time limit that
It's
you want to
about 2 minutes.
That'd be
Yep. We'll be prepared to be wowed.
I'm working on it. Every day I'm practicing more and more in the new job.
Yeah.
Hopefully by then it'll be good.
All right. So again, last two sections of the plan, strategy and the project plan. Let me pull up the spreadsheet because it's a little easier to see than from the.
Yeah, I should probably come with that.
Yeah. And don't forget that in the Canvas shell, there's all this is provided for you. So there's an Excel spreadsheet, and you can see at the bottom, it basically walks you through every step that we've gone through. So it has all these templates for you, so be sure that you at least download those so that you can have them at your disposal when you need them. Look at all the stuff we've talked about.
Okay.
All right, so can you do this one? So last Saturday, we created 2 spreadsheets. One was for the donors and one was for individuals. And so we went through scoring them from social responsibility, all the way through the overall match, and then there's a total score. And so then based on that total score, you target those that, obviously the ones that had the high, but also the ones that were with the low scores. And so here what I did for this spreadsheet was that I linked, if you look to this PID score, so on the original spreadsheet, that cell where it says 17 something, that actually ties to the sheet, the spreadsheet before that. So that 17.5 links up to that 17.5 there.
That's in last week's.
Yes, yes. So the reason why I did that is that so you guys see remember from the first lecture that we had on the revenue structure and everything else, and we're moving into the corporate sponsors and individual sponsors. So all this is being linked together. And so on this PID sheet, the prospective individual donor, I always have these little names for these spreadsheets. The PID acquisition sheet. Those scores tied to the page before it. So that way there's a linkage between those spreadsheets.
Got it.
And so if we could, so we'll go to that. So, and then we have, based on the individual that you're going to target, there's an estimated donation amount, right? What is he or she likely to give? And so that's the target that you try to hit. From there, then you have an individual that's going to be designated to that person, right? For example, here at NSU, we have Casey, and then who's a recruiter, and then there's an advisor that's attached to him, so that when students come on board, they know who the recruiter is, they know who the advisor is, and then hopefully, if it's a large department, they're linked to a professor. So when you onboard someone, you have that continuity from when they come in, going through the program, until they graduate, right? Here, I'm trying to do the same thing with this. So you have the individual, you target them, you have an estimated amount that you want from the person, or you think that person is going to get, and there's an individual tied to that person. That person, I don't know if you remember John Moreno Escobar from the foundation, talking about.
Hopefully it was just last week.
Yeah, last week, right?
Yeah.
So it talks about, like a dating game, right? You find an individual and you sort of date them, and you want, right? Because you want to extract some money from the person, right? So here again, that individual that you assign to the person in the nonprofit, or the person that in the board, or whatever it is, right? You link that person to the person that is likely going to be a good match for that person to do. Right? And then if you go to the next section, there's all the detail on how to what is going to take you as a person assigned to liaison with the individual, all the activities that you're going to do in order to get that person. Because I'm a fairly, I shouldn't say this, but don't take this the wrong way, because I'm a fairly easy person to extract not necessarily money from, but
Everybody get them.
right? Like if you ask me, I'm going to say yes. Right? 95% of the time, I'm going to say yes. Right? So it's not gonna. So I'm like a if you get assigned to me, it's like, I'm fine. I'll do it. So you don't really. The courtship is very small.
You're a dream donor.
It's a very small courtship, right? But someone just now.
I have a question. I understand this method and the way of tracking, but how do you account for time and stewardship with this?
All right, so that's the next spreadsheet.
Oh. He's got a spreadsheet for everything.
Yeah, it's a spreadsheet for everything. So yeah, so with I was going through this thing, and I had you talk about writer's block. So then I sat with Megan. I said, Megan, if I'm a foundation, what's it going to take me to get you to donate? So then she started rattling off everything. You got to take me to the event. You got to put me because I'm not as easy. So she told me I was not as easy as you. Right?
What is that saying? I'm not instant coffee. I have to be brewed.
That's right.
So then I started. So that's why you see all those things. But that's essentially what you have to do. What are all the activities that are going to take you to get that person to become a sponsor year after year after year, right? There's, yes, and you have to go through all that process because all that is also, she said, there's also performance measures that are tied to that, right? So then you have the initial contact date, right? Then that receipt date, you can put completion date, due date, whatever you want to call it. Change whatever you want. And then it's the actual amount that you get, right? So, I mean, for the first person, it was originally 5,000, right? You go through all the process, and the person you sell. So at the end of this course, as Megan was saying, you have to do your speech, right? How are you going to sell this to the individual? So that's where you're going to get that money, is that you have to convince that person that he or she has to donate to you, right? The elevator speech that you have to give. Hopefully that you're able to get more than you anticipate, right? Because you don't want, because remember, if you look at the bottom, you have an estimated donation amount. Here I just put in $72,000, right? That's the target, right? Just like we have for at the NSU in terms of our programs, there's a minimum target that we want because you want to make sure that you meet your net profit margin, right? Same thing when you talk about the corporate and corporate sponsors, individual sponsors. There's a target amount that you need, right? It's tied to your revenue growth, to how you're gonna, right? If you're gonna increase your services, your revenue has to increase year after year, right? With new donations from corporate individuals. There's a target that you need, right? But also remember, you're trying to meet your net profit margin. You have to make sure that the fund balance is positive. You either want to maintain it from the previous years or increase that net profit margin or the fund balance. And so that means that you're going to put additional effort in increasing that revenue. So you have these estimates of what it is that you need from individuals and also from corporations. This also applies to corporations.
And then organizing your activities in this way, like really strategically by each individual, allows you then to look back, like if you do have a CRM or any of these other communication workflows, you can say, well, what makes real sense? Because sometimes, we just, put somebody in a workflow and then you forget about it. And so this can make you be a little bit more aware of what's happening and what makes more sense, so that you can streamline, okay, maybe somebody's already been to an event and they need to go in this kind of workflow, and you can kind of categorize your individuals in that way of how connected they are to your organization already.
Yes. Yes, sir.
So I'm just wondering, if you have a constrained amount of resource to go after this, could you do a weighted average? For example, I would say the PID score of 20 and an estimated donation amount, that's our first one. Whereas with a PID score of 1375 and an estimated donation amount of 4,000, maybe they're down the list. Is that valid at all to have a weighted?
Yes. I mean, yeah. So Megan tells me, keep it simple, Sal. Yes. So yeah, there's things that I can make this more complex, but yes, you can have a weighted average.
So make it more complex with this, give you kind of a statistical feeling for what your best odds.
Yeah. I mean, and it goes back to her question. I mean, the next question you talked, how do you? I made a comment. I don't know how many weeks ago, that generally most organizations do a terrible job of creating key performance indicators, right? KPIs. When I worked in government, it was the same thing. I had to create big systems for them. When I worked with the nonprofits, it was the same thing, right? Some of you guys don't have key performance indicators. I do that for almost every function, from the budgeting all the way down to human resources to service delivery, right? Because I want to see how the organization works as a total, not just in individual functions, right? That's just, very briefly, during the week, I was invited to be part of a group that's looking at early learning amongst children and City of Fort Lauderdale. And so there was a couple of educators, and then there was the chief education officer from City of Fort Lauderdale. Yes, right? Yeah, and so Zoe and myself start talking about how you're measuring this, because there's these educators who their emphasis is how we're going to get these kids to learn early, in literacy and all that other stuff, right? We're looking at it in terms of performance, program performance, efficiency, effectiveness, and that sort of stuff. So we're looking at it from an operations standpoint. But most educators don't tend to use key performance indicators to assess how well those programs are functioning, right, on the performance. So back to Lawrence's thing, yes, you can have a weighted average and you can do all that stuff. The question is how useful is it going to be to you, and then also the utility of it, but also how complex do you want it, right? I like to follow Megan's sort of thing, keep it simple, Sal.
Well, I think that's when you really target, like back to last week's thing, like this, when you're prioritizing your donors, you really categorize these things at the top, the social responsibility, to what's important to your organization. So this might not be the categories that you use.
Exactly.
If you want to, if it's more important to you, like how much they're going to give, and that's that weighted percentage is important, then that's what you would put here, so that their ending total score is higher, and then they end up being on that list.
Yeah, and that's what we do when I teach public policy analysis. That's what I do. I usually do weighted. I have some particular things that are scored higher than others, so there's a weight to it. So at the end, yeah, you have a weighted score. All right, so. And then because I'm a budget person, so you have the actual donation, then you have the variance, right? How did you meet the target? Were you under the target? And that's the variance analysis. That because I'm a budget guy, finance guy, I do that. But also it goes back to questions about performance indicators, right? Because you want to see how effective you are in doing what, meeting that target, right? But also all those events, all those activities that take place, there's a cost to that. The longer it takes you to get money, the more cost is associated with getting that amount.
Yeah.
Right? And so, to what extent how much effort? True story. And then we'll go to the next spreadsheet. When I was told that I've been here 6 months, the first quarter I taught a class Intro to Nonprofit. The next class, the next quarter I taught integrated a capstone, integrated seminar. And during that class, there was these two students. It's a family couple, and I'm supposed to talk to them because they're supposed to give a big donation to the university, between $250,000 to $500,000. And this program, the administration wasn't treating them very well, right? And so I'm seeing all this email traffic going back and forth, okay? They're going to be in my class, right? So because I'm very student-oriented and student-focused, my primary responsibility is to make sure that they get the class done, right? Whether or not they give a donation, to some extent, it's going to be a reflection on me, because this is the last class, and a reflection on the administration, right? Because there's a lot of money potentially tied to their graduation and their commitment to this university, I had to take a lot of stuff into consideration, right? Not just them performing well, right? But it's also their continued support once they graduate, because it's $250,000 donation that they're talking about, right? We're very good friends, so if I go to Seattle, I have a place to stay, because we became very good friends. But I had to make sure that that there was all the activities, all the support that they had, not only to pass that class, but all the things that weren't getting from the administration, I had to make sure that I sort of smooth that over. And so in many cases, that's what you have to do. But it's also adding the cost, right, of securing that amount.
And then, once when you've put your initial contact date and your receive date, that also ties back to your original goals, where you outline the needs of your organization and the costs associated with those. This can show you, are you on track? Do you need to, re-examine this? Are you going to have to forfeit something that you originally thought you were going to be able to do? And then just, so it's this constant feedback loop of re-strategizing and thinking about where you're at in your whole time frame here, as opposed to where you thought you needed to be.
All right, so let's go to this Gantt chart. So obviously this Gantt chart is tied to the spreadsheet before, and so there you have all the time periods for the first donation, securing that donation. Right, it starts January 3rd, and then it goes to January, the 12th of January. back to your question and to Lawrence's thing about key performance indicators. If you're an HR person, there's a time that you issue the job description. The job becomes vacant, right? The particular date. You post that job. You recruit for it. You have individuals who come for the interviews. You go to the interviews, right? And then there's a hire date. So there's a time of issue, time of hire, right? That's important. Why? Because there's a cost associated with that. The cost that it takes a recruiter to go through the recruitment process, to go through the whole process of filling that vacancy. The more that person spends recruiting for that position, the more expense that position is going to cost, right? Not only that, but it's also the salary, the negotiation that's going to come, so you have the actual salary that gives, plus all the costs that are associated with it. So one key performance indicator that's based on the Gantt chart is the time of initial contract to the end, right? So you can see performance over for from every donation. You can then have an average time, right? If you have cost activity, if you do all the costing by activity, then you have all the initial time that the cost that it takes for the individuals, right? From how long it takes to make a contact to when you secure that donation, right? Obviously, if that person's salary is high, the cost of securing that per hour is very high.
No, I'm just looking, so basically, the more that's filled in here, that's not a good ROI, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So the more activities that it takes to secure that donation,
Yeah.
there's a lower return of lower return of investment, right? So if you go to the previous spreadsheet, and you see that variance analysis, that variance analysis doesn't take into account the cost of securing that donation.
You could even, I'm going crazy here,
Go ahead.
analysis, you could go into the Gantt chart and like, say, okay, face-to-face meeting cost is 3
Yes.
hours, and
Yes.
calculate your salary hourly and go
Yes.
like, wait a minute, how much of that time
Yes.
and money did
Yeah.
we spend to get that gift?
Yes.
And was it
Yeah.
worth it?
Now,
That's
yes,
crazy.
ma'am.
Why are these development professionals meeting with these donors every single day, day to day? Aren't they?
On the
I can't
sample.
get people to meet with me once a month. How are they getting the same donor 5 days in a row?
No, this is just to
wanted to
show.
hang out.
This is just to show how
Okay.
they.
I thought it was
This is
like
not
they
a
were
reality.
actually
This is
No,
like
so
some
here's-
fictitious
yeah.
individual.
So let me give you. So you guys met Casey. He's a recruiter, right? When someone talks to me about becoming part of the program, right? There's the contact that they make with me, right? I follow up with the person. Then I go to my trusted recruiter and advisor, Casey. Casey then follows up with contacting that person, right? Talking to that person, understanding what that person wants out of the program, and so forth. So there's my handoff to him. So by the time we get an individual in the program, it's my time plus all the activities that Casey takes, right? Also remember, the longer it takes to secure a donation, that also means that there's opportunity costs associated with you, right? Because there's other donations that you want to target.
Well, and say like, when you were figuring out your goals and your needs and your tactics and the costs associated, you can also categorize those as phases. Like if you need to, we need to secure this amount of money by this time, so that can be your marker here. And then, so that would be the way that I would look at it, and then you're going to work backwards and go, okay, what makes sense? What's a point of contact or a call to action? How long should that be spaced out? At least a week before you call each person. Then you're going to invite them to an event, and then potentially maybe you're going to take another donor with you and go to a lunch or something like that, depending on what that individual is looking for. But then work backwards so that you can, when you're hitting that phase state of like, oh, we need to hit here, then you can fit all of your other activities within there.
So this is just me thinking out loud, I hope it's okay. So I was thinking about the class that we had, we were talking about like communication or regular communication. And one of the nice things, at least, there's only like, I think you guys only have add to newsletter here, but some of that regular communication, if you have like a regular stewardship plan for birthday cards and things like that, those are kind of like systematic, easy ways to
That are in between.
that
your
don't
other
take a
stuff.
lot of time
Yes.
necessarily to just
Yeah.
add to those touch points, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, remember, I'm trying to keep this as simple as I
No,
can.
I know, but this is good though. This is
Yes, no,
perfect.
but you have to think of what are all the activities that it's going to take to secure that donation, corporate and individual. What is the estimated time that it's going to take you to do it? right? Obviously, the more specificity you have in terms of data collection, the better it is for you, because then you understand the average time that it takes, right? So then you can allocate resources based on that average time, right? And so you have the low end and you have the high end, and it depends on how you want to spread that out, but that gives you all that data in terms of management, right? Operations management. You also look in terms of efficiency, right? When do you start, when do you end, because there's a time cost to that, there's a dollar amount tied to that. So how efficient are you in securing those dollars?
And when do we
Right?
give up?
Yes, right?
Exactly.
Yes, opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's also, but then remember, there's indirect costs that you may consider, there's also indirect benefits that you may consider, right? So all that stuff, I mean, it depends on, going back to Lawrence's thing, how complex do you want to make it? For a small organization that just started, that's almost impossible, right? For a large established organization, that's something that you should consider doing, because it adds to how well you're functioning in terms of operation, right? In terms of securing those donations, and also being a good steward of the resources that you do have.
So
Yes,
can I
ma'am.
ask, oh, sorry, full questions.
Go ahead.
There's also an organic process, and it takes time. And if you go into a meeting with a donor with your goal and your date in mind, and you rush and ask, you can totally ruin a
Oh,
relationship.
for sure. And we're going to talk about that because today's about the presentation. So yeah, it's definitely reading your donor and knowing, you know, and I think, you know, Larry was sharing an experience he had earlier, you know, and sometimes you feel like it's going to be a longer process, and maybe you're in the meeting and you're like, oh man, I feel like I can ask right now. So it's just, you know, kind of a really organic, it is very organic, and it's really hard to say, okay, here's your platform, this is the formula, use this every time, because it's just we're people, and you know, we're dynamic, and each person wants to feel special and heard, and so that requires different things for different people.
Yeah, and go back to what Karen said or asked earlier, maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago. How do you read a room? How do you read people? A lot of that's intuition. Right? Like Michelle tends to know me very well now. She knows when I get very shy and bashful, and you know, she does. And so, but it takes that ability to read somebody, right? How do you read a person? I don't like using the word vibe, but to some extent, what vibe do you get from that individual? Right? Because that then sort of sets the stage of how you want to proceed. Like I said, I'm a very easy person to get my assistance, and you know, if you ask, and I'm going to say, you know, 95% yes, right? Because I know there's a need. Other folks, it takes just a longer time, and so you have to be able to do that. How do you read a person? What is the likelihood of success, right? Also the likelihood of failure, right? If there's a chance, if there's more than a 50-50 chance of pursuing something, you ought to do it, especially when it comes to donations, because that's even if it's small, that's a donation you didn't have. Right? It's better to try something than not try, right? Because you do have to survive.
So like something that's been coming up, and I'm just going to give a real life example, is donor fatigue and attrition. And I noticed that the majority of donors are in, I would say, older, like 70s and 80s are the big donors. The problem is they're not really passing their responsibilities to the next generation. And how do we steward that relationship to become meaningful, like for the organization? Like, is there something that we can do or say to these individuals to carry that responsibility to the next generation?
Well, I think you just saying that alone and having that kind of conversation would resonate with a lot of folks. You know, when you start talking about their legacy and, you know, what they're going to leave to, you know, their family and the responsibility that they've felt in their life that's important for them to give, and to pass that on to other folks, because I think that's powerful, just having that conversation.
Yeah, so let me use an analogy. Every time that I became a director, budget director, finance director, so forth, I always looked at my staff, not just because of professional development, but I also looked at my staff because I knew I was going to be a short timer, meaning that the longest tenure I would be at a government would be 4 to 7 years, because I was a political appointee. But I always, and I still do that now, I look at who's in that department, who's likely to stay. Because I think of succession, right? And who am I going to groom to not only just replace me, but replace the other senior folks that are going to retire. Because you don't want, true story, I inherited a mess when I went to Miami-Dade. People were hired that they shouldn't have been there. I couldn't get rid of them. Some of them were leaving, and there was a pressure to fill those vacancies. I'm very cautious about who I bring into my organization. Right? Same thing with donors. You have to be very cautious of who you bring in. But you also should have the ability to do succession training. Right? If you have a donor who gives, lots of money, right? You know that the person may leave. So then whom are you going to replace that person with? Because you have to think about that. Right? Even small donors. Right?
Well, and ideally, you've already cultivated that relationship with that donor. So ideally, they're going to be the advocate for you. Whether it's through their own family or somebody else. But I can see in my head like these beautiful, emotional, impactful messages that say, that can demonstrate that feeling of passing the torch on to their other younger generations. And so I think that's an interesting campaign to look at, especially for that population of your donors.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you also include maybe endowments from that perspective?
Yeah,
because sometimes, the next generation or the next person has a different lens on, on where they may look at their social giving. And so it's best to try and cultivate that relationship, I think, and if I'm wrong, correct me, but it's best to try and cultivate that kind of relationship so that they can say, you're important enough for me to make sure that that your organization is staying abreast, or staying alive, rather.
The day that I met Karen and Tracy, when we went to the Women's Leadership Conference, there was a young lady that was on the panel with Karen, and Heather, and there was another lady, Heather Geronimus from Ultimate Software, and then there was another lady, and then there was this young lady that was in her 20s. Her family moved from Venezuela or something like that, established her company here because of all the political stuff. What that young lady does, for every branch or new person that comes on board, she actually encourages them to become socially responsible. Where are you going to help socially? And that's part of the organizational culture, right, that she's instilling, because they're creating a new cohort of philanthropists. If you want to join an organization, you got to be responsible. How are you going to contribute, right? How are you going to get other people to contribute? And so that's one of going to the succession training, right? You have to have that in mind, right? Also, the other thing, I was, if you're an executive director, right? If you start, Larry and Maria started Happy, right? And Karen and Tracy started both had kids. Eventually, you're going to not be here. Whom are you going to have to take over that organization? Is that organization going to die with you, or is it going to continue? Same thing with philanthropists. Is that money going to continue going forward, or does it end when that person leaves? Right? You got to think about those sorts, because that becomes part of the strategy. How are you going to do it? Right? Again, we're talking about obtaining donations, but remember, it's not just a one-time thing. They have to give year after year, year after year. You have to grow that. As your organization expands, the need for revenue also expands. Right? The Gantt chart sort of charts it out as to how you want to do it with all the tactics that you have.
Any other questions? Conversation. So all of these worksheets are in Canvas. So if you go under the Fundraising Strategic Plan Resources, there's a Word doc and the Excel spreadsheet that one's the outline and one gives you all of these templates. So under modules, yeah, you see the, yeah. So overall, I mean, again, as it is very organic, and these are some tools to use, but really ultimately it's just about being purposeful. It's about having a strategy for what you do, and not just just doing it. I think that especially when it's a very relationship oriented industry. I mean, it's all about that, and so it's hard to necessarily always have a strategy when you have people in mind. but it's important given that, you know, we all have a finite amount of time and we do need outcomes, and to really tie all that kind of stuff together. So it can feel impersonal when you have to do this stuff, but if you do this effectively, then you can focus on the personal stuff when you're actually one-on-one in front of your donors.
What I find we get stuck with a lot of times is we have what I would call toxic donors.
Yeah.
And, you know, they, not that they're your largest donors, but they give a nice gift and you appreciate their gift, but they are always throwing negativity your way and needing the CEO's time and energy.
Like very demanding.
And if you really analyze it like this, you probably wouldn't want them as donors anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how you would recommend dealing with that kind of situation in a way. Like, do you fire your donors? Do you? I don't no, this is a real problem that I see in terms of being productive.
Well, I mean, you know, ideally in a perfect world, individually, I would come into a place and be like, ooh, you're not making my world, this is not productive or efficient, so I'm going to get rid of you. It's just not
in the real.
It's not in the real,
No,
you know?
no. So what is real?
So I
How
think
do you
that,
solve those
I think
best
it's,
you
you
It never
know,
goes away.
you can do what?
It never goes away.
I would like
Yeah.
continually try to push the positives of their gifts in their face. Like say, your gift has been so meaningful to this organization, X, Y, Z, and this is why. And you being a part of it has had a ripple effect in the community. You're a leader. Thank you so much, and we need you.
And that
and then they call
impression.
you back the next day and they say, I'm mad that you didn't recognize me at this location. And then they call you the next day. I'm mad that the CEO didn't give me a hug when he saw me. I mean, this is called toxic.
That's a little
Yes.
You're talking about
I would say,
normal.
you know,
So, you're talking first Jeanette and then Jamie.
Well, you have a special ringtone and they go to voicemail.
I mean, I'm really serious.
Yes.
I think it is okay to let donors go. I think that if the donor is negative when they're having a conversation with you and you work for the organization, imagine what they're saying out in public.
Right.
Yeah, I have to give to this organization because they don't have their stuff together. Let them go. I've done that before. Like, thank you for all your help. Or, you know.
Well, and I think at some point you say, you know, I'm sorry you were so unhappy. You know, perhaps we're not a good fit for you.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
that's something we experience.
So Jamie and then David.
That's something we experienced as well, where we recently had a transition of just overall organizational leadership, and this one giving society is so used to operating in one specific way that basically unlimited access to any organizational resource, and we're kind of tightening that up a little bit, and they are not responding in the most positive way. So it's definitely a struggle, and it was, oh, well, we would promise we would get, you know, bricks on the sidewalk, we would promise this, why don't we have it? Okay, well, we have all new staff here, so let's go through it all and we'll see what we can do. And it really just like, okay, why are you unhappy? What can we do to make you happy? And if not, so on.
Yeah. And a lot of times it might be situations to where, you know, they're lonely. It's other things.
No,
Yeah.
it always
You know,
is.
they're lonely.
always
You're
bad.
like their 30-second of interaction in a day. You know.
I get that.
Yeah.
David?
No, we actually had one of our long board members that was like that, and you know, major contributor to us, and we would reach out to her when we had board meetings, and nothing. So then I ended up sitting down with our president, and I said, "What do you want me to do?" And he says, "Get rid of her." I said, "What?" So I drafted a letter, nice letter, you know, in the letter on her letterhead mentioned, you know, thank them for everything they've done in the past, and you know, if they want to be part of us, feel free to reach out. We signed it off, we send it, and we haven't heard anything back. So we just dealt with that naturally. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
That's amazing.
I eventually, you know, because of the positions that I had to deal with all kinds of toxic clients, toxic employees, and you know, I have a high threshold for a lot of stuff, despite going, we joke around about my marriages. But I have a high threshold for stuff, especially when it comes to my employees. Because, and even with dealing with clients and donors and stuff like that, right? There's an obligation, me personally, I have an obligation to make sure that they're not necessarily that I cater to them all the time, but that their needs are met and whatever needs they have. But it does get to a point where I eventually got to say, we got to part company, right? But when I do that, I also have a strategy on how I'm going to replace that person. Right? And so as you wean from that individual, whether if it's a person in the organization, a board member, or a donor, you need to have a response to that. Right? It may mean having 2 or 3 additional donors to replace that one donor.
Right.
But if those three additional donors are going to be with you for the long time, for the long haul, plus also contribute to the organization in more meaningful ways, then that's what I'm going to do, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to have a stronger organization. I'm going to have a stronger fiscal position. But I'm also going to those people are also going to contribute to the cause, as opposed to having an individual that's constantly just, causing problems.
Well, it also allows you to be creative and problem solve. Like if you can tell that the base of it is they are lonely, or maybe you pair them up with a student and they're a mentor, or you're asking more of them, so then they're like, whoa,
Right.
So it's just, trying to be unique with each, which takes a lot. It takes a lot of energy because, you're already moving on to a million other things.
Right.
So
I want to safeguard my CEO's time,
Yeah.
so he's more productive and not sucked into that all the time.
Right.
But here's the point. I use that tactic a lot. I deal with people that are used to being in charge of everything. And so they want to be in charge. And so what I do is I give them things to do to stay out of my way.
And it's so important.
Nothing. But they think they're in charge.
Oh, that's smart.
So what I do is I
That's
give them
smart.
to somebody else to, for them to go after. And while they're over here, I get things to do, so I would suggest that you give them tasks.
And when they
to
have
do.
ownership, then how can they be negative over something they're
Well, they
doing?
think they're super important.
So now you know why Megan has been working on the spreadsheet.
And they think they're super important in their needs.
They have,
Okay,
but you're saying take it even beyond that and even give them like busy things, like
Yeah.
every day, like get out of here.
Busy, like a Jedi.
It's a
Yeah, like.
We're rowdy on the side.
I'm not in philanthropy, so I'm gonna put this out there first. I'm not in philanthropy. I'm in human resources. So my question pretty much is, don't you have to weigh the risk with dealing with people like that? Because usually when people are big donors, they're well connected someplace else.
Right.
And so you have to take the risk into consideration to see the backlash, and if you're willing to take the backlash, you got to do some damage control, I would believe, even with those that they're connected with. So I'm not a philanthropist. I'm not, and I don't work in this realm. But I was just wondering, there must be a strategy for damage control, especially if they're well connected in the community and donating a large amount of money continuously to the organization and might have already set up an endowment. You have to know everything about it.
Yeah, but
I think before you fire
We've
a
never
donor.
fired anybody, trust me.
But I think,
We don't walk away
even to
from
your
money, obviously. Who walks away from money? But I respect that.
But it was still professional.
Right, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
It was like, thank you for your service. I think there's still a professional way to do it so that they're not necessarily feeling the rejection.
They don't realize
You're like,
no.
They're gonna feel it.
No.
I also think you have to take into consideration the future risk too.
Okay.
So if they're hurting your reputation in like right now, that could hurt you down the line with future partners. So even if they are giving a large amount of money and maybe they're well connected, maybe you'll get someone down the line if your reputation isn't hurt by them, if they are toxic.
Yeah.
So like it's future risk as well.
Right,
No, yeah, there's a lot of things you need to consider, a lot of factors, right? One thing that you may notice about me is that I'm very protective. I'm very protective with my relationships. I'm very protective with the nonprofits. When I was a director, I tried to make sure that my staff was very protective with me, but I'm very protective of my staff as well. But again, there's times where you have to sever that relationship, right? And you do take into how are you gonna mitigate those negative consequences that come? Can you do it, right? But also, I've been in positions where I was willing to walk away. You know, where I said, you know what, this is just way too much, and I will do what I have to do, but then I myself will remove myself from it. And so to what extent are you willing to take that hit, right? Because you do have to protect that organization. You do, in terms of nonprofits, you have to remember, you have goals and a mission and a vision of your organization. You have clients that you need to serve, right? You want to grow your organization, right? Revenue is important, more important than the expenditure. So protecting this revenue and growing that revenue becomes very imperative, right? And so if you do have individuals that aren't going to contribute in a positive way, I mean, giving money is fine, but that's just one component of being involved in that organization. If the person is continuously causing issues, right? Then you do what David does. You do what HR people do. You sever that relationship, understanding that there's a risk, but also you got to understand that there's a benefit to doing that. Right? The benefit of being sane, that goes a long way, right? But also, yes, right? You're also protecting the organization. You're protecting the people in it, and so that goes a long way, right? If you're going to take a political hit, take it, right? Because in the long run, over the long run, you're going to be better off taking that hit, and that relationship. If the relationship is Megan said, if the relationships are strong, if you cultivated those individuals, you cultivated the board, right? You cultivated other folks that this individual may know, you're going to be in a very safe space. Right? Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask that, Sal. Also, if you build a new relationship out there, and people know you as an individual and your organization, and if they're so toxic with your organization, they're also toxic out there.
I was
Right?
thinking that too.
Out there. You know,
It's making them look bad, not
it
you.
really is.
Yeah.
People probably said, you know what, there's probably a good reason why this person has done that, and they've just let it go.
Yeah.
So,
Good point.
Yeah.
Well, and pick your battles. Nobody can you can dig your heels in, and I mean we're all gonna have to eat a little bit every now and again. I mean it's just the nature of life, right?
So, I think we exhausted this topic. I'm now severing this part of the
There you go.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate that.
What? Yes. How to be engaging and compelling.
Yeah. So now back to our presentations. So understanding, why face-to-face is still more important than ever, given all the technology, we think that we can kind of disconnect a little bit, but even more so now that it still requires that face-to-face. We'll demonstrate how to properly plan for your next donor presentation and study how to build units of conviction for use in your presentation. So it's kind of like your toolbox. So telling a story about the benefits of becoming a true advocate of your cause and building on that connection you've established with your prospect. Data versus emotion. So 50% of donors say they want to hear about an organization's track record before donating. 38% do some research before giving. And 9% do side-by-side, only 9% do side-by-side comparisons of other nonprofits. So ultimately the translation is donors give to things that move their heart, not things that are engaging their intellect. The data is important, but it's that why that's going to resonate. That passion versus perfection. Belief in and excitement about what you're saying is more important than perfection. You can have all the data, you can have all your stats, and you can just feel it out there. But if you are not delivering it in a way that shows that you believe in it and that you believe in your cause, then it's not going to resonate with anybody. And also, I think a good part here too is if you don't also financially contribute to your cause, then why would anybody else?
Oh, yeah.
So the planning guide, you know, the things that you'll prepare as you're going to cultivate your donor, and the presentation for that specific donor. You know, thinking about their contact info, the objective, their other personal relationships, to the point there of like knowing, you know, the 6 degrees of separation there of how they're connected to the folks around you on your board, other giving that they do. The things that might resonate with them, like other communication tools, visuals. You know, maybe they're an engineer or something, and they're gonna want to see more data. Then, you know, having that kind of prepared for that particular donor and knowing what that resonates with them, and especially when, to Sal's point earlier, that succession planning. You know, when you can lay all this out for your donors, then when somebody else, you have to pass that torch, then somebody else knows how to kind of pick it up and lead with that particular donor. You don't want to cultivate that relationship, and then when you leave the organization, that it ends with you. So make it interesting for all donors, and especially for existing donors. Try to make your presentation meeting exciting. What are some of the things that you guys do to make your meetings exciting when you're presenting?
Bring a gift.
Bring a gift? It's true. Like when I want students to listen, it's like food. Bring food.
Show and tell. Show and tell. Tours.
Tours. I like that.
Manipulatives. So in other words, and you know, that's the term, but when you, whether it's adults or children, if you give them something they have to build, create, or design, or put together themselves while you're doing that presentation, it forces them to understand your why as well.
Give an example.
Very simple. You bring in and make sure that everybody has a chessboard in front of them. And then you also have a display of the different maneuvers on the board. Now you're letting them know, why would you make the next move? Everybody make the next move. And then they're all making their moves, and then you can show them there were 400 possible moves, only 110 were correct. How many of you made the 110 correct moves? Now you immediately got them engaged, because now they're thinking critically.
They want to win.
They want to win.
That's but good. How does, I'm not sure, I don't see how that connects to, like, how you do that in a donor meeting?
You do that in a meeting, any manipulative, that's what she said, give an example. So any meeting particular that you want to grab their attention. So if I'm grabbing the attention.
I guess I'm wondering specifically for a donor meeting, because I don't know, like, I would love to know something.
Brain again. Don't do this, right? But to me, I have been in meetings where somebody, you get a piece of a puzzle, and you give, everybody has a piece of a puzzle, and that puzzle looks a little bit different, right? But when you get together and do maybe a little, you know, a little, what do you call it?
Group exercise?
Yeah, group exercise, or get to know you, or just a, you know, introduction. You try, icebreaker, that's the word. I'm also having birthdays every year. And so, you know, and you just put as an icebreaker, you meet somebody else who has your part of the puzzle, and maybe you can talk about that from a donor perspective, and the power of, you know, of you being a part of the puzzle to make the organization as best that it could be.
I guess I'm trying to understand the format of when you
I
would do
can
something
say like boy tie kids. Maybe you have
Like
an
a board
exercise with
meeting
the donor where they have to tie a bow
meeting.
tie.
Yeah.
Oh,
Or they need to.
She went straight there, didn't she?
Yeah, okay, like maybe our board meeting, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out like how. Alright, no, I'm thinking, maybe like our tours, sometimes we have like group tours, but we bring in girls to talk usually. But I mean, maybe there's something else we could, I like this idea, I'm trying to think about how it could tie in though.
Well, I think there's an opportunity too, when you have some sort of component in a presentation to show what actually happens in your program. It allows the donor to see what you guys are actually implementing out in the field. So there's an opportunity there as well. If you have some activity that you do with the kids, you know, we do sewing activities or tying a bow tie, like there's a way to integrate all of that into that conversation. So it's giving them a more robust picture instead of something that's static on paper.
Thank you.
So going down.
Can't hear you.
Okay, so going back to you talking about the puzzle pieces, so if you're in a meeting and you break everybody up, let's say 5 food, you have the puzzle pieces, you put them in a Ziploc bag. You put on each table, the only directions you give is, let's see who can build that puzzle piece the fastest. Once they open it up and they're in that group, they're trying to put the pieces together, it's not working. You never told them they couldn't go to another table to find another piece. And you're showing them how if we all talk together, we can figure this out because everybody's on the same goal. We got to get this puzzle together. So you go around different tables and talk to different people, you get to find out what pieces they have to put together and come up with that.
Yeah, and then creative ways to potentially elicit the feeling that your service audience engages in every day.
So I'm interpreting this more as you're in front of one donor and you're having that face-to-face meeting.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think ways in which we can make it interesting and exciting are, you know, I presented a stewardship report and the donor loved it. Or there was, and I think I should do this more because actually it's a good idea, but show a little video to the person on your phone
Videos are
or something like that. But you know, this talks about an existing donor, and one of the challenges I have, and probably all of us have, is for those existing donors. The organization's been around 45 years. We do what we do. You know, when you have something brand new, it's fun to talk about, and it is exciting. But when you're talking about programs that they know and that the community knows, you know, it is challenging to make it exciting. And I think that's part of what I'm experiencing is how do I make this program? How do I create urgency when the urgency is not really there? I mean, yes, I can serve people who don't have enough money, or maybe I can serve a few more people, but the reality is I just need to be able to fund that program so it continues to operate well. And that's the challenge.
Well, and I think with existing donors, you know, you have to be creative in finding new ways to get them engaged so that they see your organization in new ways all the time. Whether it's maybe it's a mentorship opportunity, or maybe they're going to volunteer in another way and they're going to get exposed to another aspect of your organization. It is difficult, you know, because, you know, especially when you're around for so long, but, you know, it's also being in tune to that donor, and maybe it's, you know, they have a grandson or a granddaughter and it's inviting them to go do something, and then they see it through their eyes. I mean, it can be a variety of different things, but it's just exposing them to new things.
To her point, sorry, go ahead. To her point, she said she is existing donors and then going back to them. So if you know that that person's been around for a while and your program has gone into a different direction slightly, and you're showing them a millennial in your video clip that they did not know was even a part of it. So they say, they see a Coco Golf. She's a tennis player, she's young. If she's associated with your program and doing activity with your program, now that sparked them and jones them into actually going ahead and doing something they otherwise would not have done. And now they can maintain their interest.
Or maybe you told them that instead of what your program does, what could happen if the program was not there. So just,
that's good too.
Right. Not showing what it could, if it's not there, well, how would it affect the community?
Right, their continued support allows us to continue, and if we didn't, then this could exist.
You can use focus groups and to bring people in, because a lot of times we're supposed to be listening more. I fall into that where I'm trying to pitch, and then you need to step back and do surveys and focus groups and make them feel part of the process of improving what you're doing by having a focus group.
I also think that sometimes as workers, we get bored because we do the same thing. So you have to get back to a place of, why am I here? Why is this organization here? Our whys. Once you spark up your why, it's easier to communicate, it's easier to attach itself to even an old donor, a new donor, because you've refreshed in yourself of the reason why you're here. Why do you do the job that you do?
Well, I think you touched on a really good point. It's like, yes, this is focusing on your relationship with your donors and your existing donors, but it's also internally. because you know, you're the employees, that people, boots on the ground, you know, you're the ones that are out there and spreading that mission, especially if you're doing if your job specifically, it might be steps away from seeing the actual impact, then it can be you can easily get disillusioned a little bit. So finding ways to also instill that philosophy internally with your organization.
Yeah, but remember also that your organization is not static. It's constantly changing, right? Your environment is constantly changing. And so if you have short-term, long-term needs, you have an existing donor, why not talk about the needs that you have immediately, but also going forward, and how their support is actually going to continue that organization moving forward. So there's multiple ways of making this exciting for people, right? First Morgan, and then
Yeah. So while some of our services may not change, the people we serve change on a constant basis. So the people, the stories, you know, so maybe it's not just, hey, this is a new person and this is where they're starting, plus here's an alumni from the program and this is where they've ended up, and literally, like you said, show and tell. It's like, so where is that, can someone come in, can an alumni come back that you serve, that now they're doing so fantastic that is willing to share their story? To me, that's how I do it, is like a lot of people, like just, you know, they're changing all the time. So yeah, to show like what you're doing is working.
Jake?
So I see a big reason why donors don't invest is because they're not interested in your project or like what you're doing exactly. They have other interests. So something we do with our donors to get them excited and interested is we build projects based on what they're interested in.
Right.
So if they're interested in basketball, we'll build a project to, like it'll be different through different groups, but since we have kids as our main focus, we'll build, if they're into basketball, we'll build a basketball game or summer program where the donor will run or he'll oversee because he's interested in basketball. So then he's giving to our cause that we can use for other things as well, but we also have that added on now. So now we have multiple projects going on, but it also gets them interested in donating as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes back to Darwin's thing about using manipulatives, right? I mean, for me, like, you know, when I met Jake and Daniel, I come from a very from martial arts background and from boxing and that sort of stuff, and so that's an automatic attraction to my life, my power, right? So if so as a potential donor, if they're having karate exhibitions, for example, or any type of activity that's going to engage me as a potential donor, you know, and I get a chance to box a couple or, you know, that sort of stuff, I'm in there.
He wants to beat up on the kids.
Like I'm in there, like, you know. No, I want to feel young, you know. Right? So, but I mean, because that's what's going to attract me to them, right? Same thing with bow tie kids, right? If I'm, you know, because of the things that I've been through, that I experienced, right? If they're engaging with those kids, right, and they get me to be engaged with those kids, that's a more emotional connection. Right? I have a stronger ties not just to the organization, but actually what they're doing.
And that's that needs discovery phase that we did before. So by the time you get here, you know, and you know, this is an activity that it focuses on doing with new donors, but you know, we should be doing with your existing donors because you need to keep them too. So really, and they change. We you know, our interests change. What you asked me what I like today is not the same thing that I liked 6 months ago or a year ago. So it's also keeping your finger on the pulse there on what's happening in their lives.
I feel like I maybe have a different philosophy on fundraising. I wouldn't want to implement a program just to get money in the door. I want to fund what I'm already doing. And if the basketball program is something that is in line with where I want to go, then great, that's part of the plan, let's get donors in the door to do that. But let's say the basketball program costs you $100,000 to run, you know, a 6-week clinic over the summer, but the donor's going to give you $25,000. You just lost $75,000.
Yeah, you definitely have to do the ROI.
Right, and from a donor perspective, if I'm giving money to a basketball program, you can't use that money for anything else. It has to go to that basketball program. So it's not like, okay, $25,000, let's put it towards, you know, arts and, you know, nutrition, unless the nutrition is tied into how you can perform better in the basketball program.
Right, and that's what I would suggest. Like if you have your curriculum and your principles, you know, that tailors, and that's what I'm assuming you guys do.
Yes, so like that's why it's going to be different across organizations. But our main goal is to help the kids no matter what. So if we create a basketball program, it keeps them off the streets and gives them something to do, then it's helping the students no matter what. And plus, that's where the negotiation comes in. Like, if they're giving that money, it's going to be to fund the program in its whole, or we'll figure out a way to do that without us diverting money from what we're already doing. And then if we want to use it for other things, that's again negotiation where we're talking to them and say, hey, if you're doing this project and we help you run this, then why don't you help out our other parts? So it's not just like black and white. There's a gray area to talk about.
I think it's just working closely with your program staff and your volunteer coordinators, because that's where it all again lines up. And like volunteer opportunities, are a lot of times are volunteer bases, have a bright potential for some donors, etc.
Yeah. We both were over here like, oh. So I was like, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't say anything. But I feel the same way. The challenge is when you create programs to engage donors, sometimes that works in your favor if it's something you're already doing. But if you're creating it, then you have to sustain it. Or you have this thing where it could be like mission drift, and then you start doing things that are not even like I speak for our organization. We support education in developing countries. We went from doing that to buying shoes for people, tennis shoes, and now we're putting roofs on, and bathrooms, like all this stuff that's not our mission. So when you do that, sometimes you have mission drift, and it just started, innocently trying to do this program. But why would you do that? If my program is good, it's good. If you want to support me, support what we're doing. Bottom line.
True, and that's why we have those structures of when you have your goal and you have your program, you're always going to tie it back to your organizational mission. And if you can't, then don't do it. But if your organizational mission is so broad, then you can kind of have a little bit more freedom to do those pilot programs, or especially if it's not going to burden your revenue structure or take from somewhere else.
And just briefly, the other alternative is you still do it, but it's an event. It's not a program. So we're talking about a car event.
Yeah.
Boys and Girls Club has nothing to do with automobiles, but we put on an event that attracts high net worth individuals and surrounding exotic cars, and it raises a lot of money for us, and it contributes to programming, but it's two separate silos.
Yeah. Were you just saying you knew somebody?
No, I was involved with that fundraising up there in Amelia. But I think really high-end cars and they raise a lot of money. One has nothing to do with the other. There's all the extremely wealthy come from around the world. You can see the cars and the drivers.
I mean, the ultimate goal is sustainability. You want your organizations to sustain and thrive. And so, to Jeanette's point, you don't want to put resources into one-offs or into, it's the same conversation with donors. When you get to a point with a donor and it's taking away from instead of adding to, then you do have to make very difficult strategic decisions about the direction that you want to go with your organization and with your donors. So key presentation elements, the essentials, that's your mission, your vision, the reach and the work performed, your finances, how do you spend and allocate your money, legitimacy, why and how your organization represents something that is worth donors giving their time and money to, the depth, type of work done and the number of people served or services served, your impact, what you have done to impact the change in your subsector and how successful have you been. So some of those things you can compile in advance so that you're not, I think when Jeanette did her grant writing talk the other day, it's like you can develop some of these things so you already have them at your disposal. So the essentials, obviously your mission and your vision and that sort of thing you have. The legitimacy, the framework for the cause and positioning statement. the depth, more detailed information about the type of work you do, the programs you have, the people you serve, and the finances. You know, you can have your P&L and everything already outlined by program, depending on what you're necessarily wanting to show this particular donor. So charting impact. This is a tool developed by Wise Giving Alliance, GuideStar, and Independent Sector. It helps you kind of identify and outline your impact of your organization, and it organizes it by asking these questions. What is my organization aiming to accomplish? What are your strategies for making this happen? What are our capabilities for doing this? And how do we know we're making progress?
Yeah, let me stress that again. One of the without I guess I'm going to overgeneralize, but one of the things that I find a little disheartening is that there's not enough care given to the impact that organizations make. Right? And
say that again.
There's what is disheartening is that organizations don't give enough emphasis on what they are accomplishing.
Oh, okay.
And so we're talking earlier about key performance indicators. One thing that I like to see are the key performance indicators, not just the people that you serve, but what outcomes are they getting out of your program, right? So if we go back to Jake's thing about basketball, right? Although it may not necessarily be part of that mission, but you are getting kids engaged in doing things that they normally wouldn't do. So there's a benefit to that, right? There's leadership skills that are being developed. There's other, social responsibility, right? Social capital. There's all those things that program is going to accomplish, but there has to be a way of measuring it, right? We were talking earlier with Darwin about 3 weeks ago, right? About utilizing quantitative and qualitative research, right? Right? And so when the kids go out to the golf course, right? They're learning several things, right? Course management, right? Which they can apply to their lives, right? Interacting with individuals that are high performing, but also have notoriety, positive notoriety, right? And so you're getting to learn to overcome that barrier, that social barrier that you have in not talking to individuals. True story. My brother-in-law, he's a founding history professor at California State University, Channel Islands. He did not go to UCLA like I did because he was intimidated at the university. There was a barrier that he's a son of a multimillionaire. They couldn't overcome that social barrier of going to UCLA and dealing with professors, right? So when you talk about kids, right, engaging with professional golfers, there's that interaction that occurs that needs to be captured, because that means that individuals can be able to do what? Interact with individuals that are in a different social class, right? Individuals of a different status, right? But that is a very good skill to have, because what do you need? As you grow up, you need those skills, right? To do what? Interact with donors, interact with corporate people, right? And so again, learn to measure the impact that your organization has, right? For happy, right? You're going to be training individuals that have mental
developmental
yes,
disabilities.
yes, right? And so there's a process of how you do that, right? When they come in, there's a baseline, right? You got to touch that baseline so that when they get on your program, they have skills that they'll be able to utilize, right? You have to capture that early on. Otherwise, as Megan and I say, then you got to retrofit. Retrofitting stuff to things that occur it's very hard. But then you don't capture what you're supposed to capture, right?
And
so
thinking about those measurements now, it's a long game, right? Especially if your programs are touching, or working with children, you want to follow them through their career, and have those success stories, as Maureen pointed out, what she was doing with her alumni, because that resonates to the impact of your organization with donors. So when you can answer these 5 questions, if you develop these and you think, okay, really what is my impact, and that's why we kind of organize things between the outputs and outcomes, so that you can think, okay, numbers, how many people did we serve, how many programs did we offer, but then what are the outcomes? What are those intrinsic things that are going to benefit the individual, our organization, and our community as a whole? So when you think about the actual individual, what other things besides opportunity do you want them to gain from your programs? And then how can you measure those things? So, and solicit help. I mean, you know, there's so much resources out there on how to measure different skill sets, different value systems, different, you know, social capital, all of these things that, you know, especially, you know, tap into the educational institutions around you, because there's tons of research being done all the time to kind of help figure out how to measure these things.
You made a good point there, and I just want you to help me with it. Measuring different value systems. Different value systems, how do you measure if one cultural group or one particular area values X, and this other organization and culture group values Y? How do you make those things quantifiable or even valued in your deliverable? Because again, if you're valuing something that is, you know, shoes, and the other person is evaluating it values a savings account, those things don't match.
No, but well, you need the one before you get the other. But I think that's when that's the tailoring your message. So that gives you that qualitative data back so that you can evaluate how do we organize our programs. So especially if you're going to do a focus group from one of your programs and you're realizing, okay, this demographic is getting this XYZ out of it, and this demographic is seeing that this program was about this. So then it gives you that sort of qualitative information of like, well, what do we want them to get? And then how can we tailor our programming to be so that it does match? Because I think that disconnect is informative, and it's going to tell you that perhaps we need to go back and look at our programming structure and figure out how to maybe deliver some of the content differently. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Yes.
No.
I'm thinking about it. Yes.
Okay. So again, with the grants, and I won't say too much on this, but again, these are kind of background information and narratives that you can already have ready for you, so that when you have different grants and sponsorship opportunities come up and proposals that you need to develop, that you have that at your disposal. So concisely answer your goals, your objectives and key strategies, resources and key staff, outcomes and evaluations, successes and challenges. You know, it's not always about everything that we've done well. Sometimes it's about those things that you've recognized that you could do better, or that the program, you know, you recognize perhaps, you know, we can get a greater consensus if we change the programming in some sort of way. So the units of conviction, the way that I think about this is literally like your toolbox, you know, of the different audience that you are in with the prospective donor. You know, these are some things that you're going to develop now. So if everybody will get their handout, it's this units of conviction. So we're going to talk about this, and then you're going to have an opportunity to kind of just develop one of them. And so the feature is just one of your programs or services. So just think about, and again, it's a building block because you can do this for each of your programs or service or feature. So think about one, and then the bridge is a transitional phase to link the feature to the benefit. And then the benefit is obviously the highlighted feature, whatever benefit that feature or that program or service that it has on the organization or on the individual. And then evidence to support your claims. 20% or 80% of the students did XYZ, or they were employed after they took this training class. And then an agreement, a tie-down question to gain agreement. So let's take a few minutes, and everybody think about one of your programs or services that you offer at your organization, and let's develop one unit of conviction for your organization.
Is this like writing like a script of, it's like the ideal script of what we said?
Right, so if like you had this is my how and why bucket for this program. So if I'm in front of this donor who's interested in this particular thing, then I'm going to pull this one out and this is what I'm going to say. And then if they're interested in this other one, then I'll have that unit of conviction to talk about that. So yes. someone has theirs down, let me know, and so I wanna hear a few.
I don't know if I did mine right, so
Okay.
I'm embarrassed.
Don't be embarrassed.
Just want one of those things, right? Each with
One
one.
or something else.
Oh, you wanted one?
You want me to give, do what? Yeah, so just one, oh, you're doing your whole organization, I love it.
Well,
So this is, but that's a good point. So one unit of conviction is just one area of your organization. So you could piece these together for your entire presentation depending on your donor and what their interests are.
I mean, I'll go, but you can tear it apart, 'cause I
Okay.
don't know if I followed the format right.
Okay.
Um,
Can everybody hear? I have the
so again,
microphone.
guys, I don't know that I did this right, but
It's okay.
so.
It's a safe space.
It's perfect because I'm talking about therapy programs. That's
Good.
So I work for Pay Center for Girls, and we support teen girls across the county of Broward. One of my favorite programs is what we call HYPE, Healthy Youth Transition, and it serves girls that are aging out of the foster system. So we can serve the girls into their early teens, all the way through into their early 20s. So we're supporting them really in getting those skills that they aren't getting most likely at the foster homes or with their foster parents, that they are basically booted out at 18 and just expected to say like, great, you're an adult now, you're good, and that leaves them open to just being really vulnerable, not being able to survive, vulnerability to sex trafficking, a lot of other really scary things that are out there. So our program, and I have all the stats I would present obviously, but my biggest thing would be telling a story of an alumni and how we supported her, maybe comparing to, again, stats on what does happen when girls do age out and they don't get that support. And then also I would talk about the partnerships that we build in the community, because we work with different foster care programs, we work with a lot of different community programs to kind of widen our net that we're casting to make sure that these girls don't fall through the cracks.
And that's what you're using as your evidence.
Yes, and then basically with your support, you would allow us to continue to keep these partnerships, keep this program going so that we can make sure that literally no girl falls through the cracks and she is taken care of and supported into adulthood.
So that last part would be the agree. Do you see the value in our program?
Okay.
So it's
So kinda
like
ask
you
the
want
question.
them to agree with you.
Okay.
And so on the benefit too, I think you touched on the benefit for as the girl going through the program, which is great if you're in front of a donor where that resonates, but also think about potential other benefits to your organization or to the community, like what they're going to do for their community as a whole. Like maybe they're going to be, contributing members of the workforce or whatever. it might
Okay,
be.
so that's what I build it into. Okay, so
Yep.
before evidence, it's kind of like part of evidence, but we could put it before.
Yes.
Okay, got
Yep.
it.
Anybody else?
So Megan, you know that we talked about the unemployment, underemployment rates for people with autism, highest number of labor statistics has ever measured at 80 to 90%. That's what we're about.
Yeah.
We're trying to solve that problem. One of the ways we're solving that problem is we created a first of its kind, first in the United States, program that teaches people, trains them over 18 months to become certified aviation technicians. We're doing this in conjunction with Broward College. The part that's so good about this is, unlike other programs, they essentially have a guaranteed jobs. We have avionics companies coming to us, offering us money to get these programs going, to get the kids working in it. So the demand for employment is higher than the supply. And don't you think that would make a huge difference in the life of one of these kids?
That's great. That's great. And eventually on that evidence part, you can start off with that 80-90% percentage, and hopefully, is that nationally? So then if you.
It's the same here.
Okay, so then, okay.
It's a uniform number.
Okay, so then you can potentially start showing improvements in how your organization is improving that number. Yeah, love that. One at a time. I love it. I'm sold. Yes.
So at Flamingo Gardens, within our wildlife sanctuary, we have a breed and release program. There are hundreds of birds that are brought to us that have become permanent residents because their injuries are sustained and they can't be fixed and re-released. we give them a good quality of life, but what we do is many of them are capable of reproducing. And so they produce, and we have a breed and release program where we take their offspring, release them back into the wild to repopulate the wild. Because the problem is humans are clashing with animals as we encroach more and more in their native habitat. And by giving them, by repopulating, we're able to contribute to that, but we also, with our education programs, we then teach our guests about being better stewards and being careful when they're driving, and a lot of the injuries occur because of car and animals colliding. So then I could talk about, as far as evidence, I could talk about Chompers, the pelican who comes back every year, had its guts ripped out by an alligator, so it wasn't a human contact, but we were able to repair them and release them, and comes back every year to where it grew up and nests there. Wow. And then goes back out into the wild. And then for evidence, I don't have it in here, but I can cite wildlife population statistics and how many people we have talked to as far as hoping to reduce some of the injuries that are caused by human and animal contact.
And then your final agreement statement? It would just be, do you see the value?
Do you see, and then just...
One thing that I would think about for your benefit, because, it can be so niche. Some folks don't necessarily see they're like, well, why does it matter if if we run over animals, or whatever it might be, of thinking about the impact and benefit of biodiversity in our area and how that can kind of translate, to our community. Anybody else want to share? Does this make sense? Cool. So as you kind of think about the other aspects of your organization and how if you can prepare these kinds of things before and you just have them at your disposal so that when you are in front of a donor, then you can understand what you want to kind of pick out of your bag of tricks of what's going to resonate with them. So, which goes into our presentation styles. 3 different styles. You have the memorized, outlined, and impromptu. Memorized, you're legitimately, kind of going through everything. You know exactly what you want to say. You have to try really hard not to be robotic. But I think it's a very, especially when you're first starting out in fundraising, it's a very good style to do so that you're sure to touch on all the things that you want to touch on about your cause, and you make sure that you're not skipping over certain things. And then outlined, you kind of have the gist of all the touch points that you want to cover, and then you know your cause well enough to be able to address all those things in between. And then impromptu, you're pretty seasoned. You know what your cause is about. You feel pretty confident about whatever questions or topics are going to come up, that you'll be able to respond in an effective way where you're providing all of this data and this, and you really know how to read people. I think that's a big skill for that style, is that you can kind of switch gears if you need to, depending on your audience.
I like the icon for that one.
I know, it's like, wee! Just winging it. It's funny how, and I don't know, everybody can tell me what you think you are, but, I think for me, I start off thinking that I need to be memorized, and then I just work to outline, and then I end up impromptu.
Yeah, it's a mix.
Yeah, so it's like...
So, I teach public speaking and these are for delivery styles, and I feel like when it comes to fundraising, it's kind of a mixture of both. So like, I have language in my head that I memorize because I write it every single day. Of course, the mission, that is word for word. And a few language tidbits, and then there's an outline in my mind so that I can impromptu give a speech or presentation on the benefits or different programs that we have.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a combination of both, kind of like what you said,
Yeah.
you start memorizing just the outline and you're like, oh yeah, now I just know all the information. And
Yeah, because you want to be able to be dynamic or like whatever that situation calls for, you know, and also you want your outline because if the conversation you realize you for 30 minutes you've been talking about something completely different than what you needed to be talking about. So how do I get us back to where we need to go? Yeah.
And it also, I tell my students all the time, they try to memorize their extemporaneous outline speeches.
Yeah.
And like, don't write down on your outline every word except for like the articles and helping verbs. You're the expert on your topic, so put down a word that would that will trigger you to talk about a certain thing. So like, for me, it'd be community-based mentoring. Okay, great. I know exactly what that entails because I'm the expert on that topic instead of basically a manuscript just without proper.
And I think you touched on a really good point there, and I think it takes a little bit of time to build that confidence, but it is to be confident in what you know. You know, I think because you do know that. It's like when I went through and got my PhD and did the dissertation and all that, I knew more about my topic than any of them did. You know, so when you stand up there and they can ask questions, but I know this, right? So it's having that sort of level of confidence in your content.
But to me, I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Parasite.
I haven't, but it's on my list.
So there's a line in there where the father says to the son, if you have a plan, it's of no value because you're going to be disappointed. It never works out the way you think.
Yeah.
So if you look at this kind of thing, we know our stuff. We're the PhD students in our particular topic. The outline is really a series of modules. But the reality is, everything is a project. You don't know who you're going to meet and what their interests are. So you can't really do it the way you think. I think you have to be proactively reactive.
Yes. Yes.
And be able to
and connect these dots.
And just connect the dots as it goes on. Now, if you don't have confidence, you're not going to. But if you have confidence, it is the easiest thing in the world to say. Like I had an instance. A donor was saying to me, "So what's the impact of what you do?"
Yeah.
And he was talking. He's politically a very right of center Republican. And I said, well, one of the issues is that people who get these jobs will no longer have SSI, Social Security, disability. And he goes, that is unbelievable. What a profound difference you're making in the lives of people. I didn't say that, he said.
Yeah.
And so he bought the story. But what I'm saying to you is...
You knew what would resonate.
Because he told me.
Yes.
I didn't know going into I didn't know what he was.
Yes.
I mean, I knew stuff about him, but I didn't know he was like this Trumpian Republican with no government. But it was a plus, not a minus.
Yeah.
I don't have to agree with his politics, but his
Absolutely.
politics played to me. So it was.
Love it. Anybody else want to share? No. All right. And then thinking about what, as we talked about earlier, what presentation aids you want to bring with you. Again, sometimes folks just want that one-on-one interaction. You know, sometimes a cool, quantitative like visualization of an infographic. If you have a lot of stats and you don't want to just sit there and bombard folks with pie charts or just with numbers, then to do something visually creative with an infographic. Qualitative visualizations, the videos, again, photos. Be sure you're capturing photos at your events or any possible time that you can. And the testimonials. So again, tells your story, allows room for imagination. The numbers are the numbers, and that it is going to resonate, and it does have a good snapshot of your organization. But again, we know that emotion is why people give. So in summary, proper presentation planning is key, but passion can get you where you need to be. Use information from the needs discovery approach and pre-approach to answer your donor's most pressing questions so that by the time you get to this phase of the presentation, you know what they want to hear. Use your units of conviction, your bag of tricks, to present the impact of your cause. And find your presentation style and use aids. Oops. look, I just fast forward right through y'all's break. It's break time.
So I
This is the house of Fighters now. They're like, I'm offering tutoring after school. So what are you doing? Good. If you want to do services for this. So then here, like,
Okay, so we're feeding Holocaust survivors. As soon as they get home from the hospital, they'll have food waiting for them.
And so and this is so their, what's the purpose of this? So that their family.
They have no family and there's no food and they would die in their apartment.
Okay.
Because there's a wait list on meals.
And so then you go to your benefit.
not in our county, come to our county, we'll help you.
And so the benefit can go to
So this was what I wrote here was the
that's your their goal, like the mission. You want to have an actual service or program.
name actual service.
This is like if she's going to a donor meeting and pitching that particular
Service, yes, and you can piece this together, like, you know, we want to highlight this service in this program, and then bring it to a
So name actual service and then the bridge would be?
It would be like the benefit, not necessarily benefit.
Bobby, I'm heading out.
So you are providing meals. So
they're going to survive.
Yeah, that could be it. It's like I'm trying to say, like, to the result of that.
I emailed you.
Did
You got it?
No.
To your like real estate card one. Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, earlier this week.
You know, I've been so.
That's okay. I may have gone to junk because it came from my from my kid email, and sometimes those go to spam. So.
Okay, come
Yeah.
Let me peek back over there. I'll take a look at
And
that.
all good. Yeah, just so we can like
Yes.
make it happen for the
Okay.
kiddos.
I'm looking at. What day was that?
Gosh, I don't remember. Let me look.
And you might just
Might look cool.
so that you know when you're
Populate on this
which
side.
ones are resonating with them. Like if they care more about your organizational liquidity and all
See
that
Kareem in
stuff
there.
that's happening there, then maybe you focus on the organizational liquidity.
Tuesday. Darwin E. Allen at Gmail. That's me.
Okay, so February 11th. Okay. As soon as you said that, I was like, here, there it is.
That's me.
All right.
All right.
Got you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Good stuff. So just let me know.
Yes, I will.
All right. Have a good one.
Goes home without. And now our service, there's now 75.
I understand.
You're making that improvement.
I understand.
Take it a step further, they kind of get the meal, go back to that, you know, they're no longer.
In need. Yes.
Because of this food situation.
I love that. And then they're not gonna hurt in the system later. Yeah,
Right.
That's almost.
So yeah, I'll take a look at that.
Right. But this was just that we were told there was a wait list for some of our donors on meals. So they were coming home from the hospital, they had no one in their lives, and there's no food, and then they died in their.
So our funding bridge the gap,
make that wait stop.
Right, and your council and Egypt, a lot, they don't raise money to provide meals.
Since we do.
What we are providing is kosher.
Oh, it's
People who require kosher. These are homebound seniors.
This is so
We do a lot of diets, but we just.
Yeah, this is for the.
Finally, like.
Now this is what I
life.
need.
Yeah.
Good, good.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry.
I feel like
Pretty much.
the donor needs something.
Summary.
All on the same page.
The needs discovery.
The needs discovery, well, we didn't get to really touch on that.
That was one thing.
Yeah, so it was in our last session, we weren't able to actually get in that house, just hope you guys can get through it in your. But it's basically the diving into your donors and discovering what it's the relationship part of like learning them.
All right, thanks.
I want to make sure that we're managing
Yes.
I know that we're having some challenges, both internally and externally, timing, and there's a lot of information that he's asking me for, which is appropriate.
Yeah.
Sometimes we want to manage his expectations. Are we to provide, like, that list he sent? Our team is in the process of yesterday we sat and divvied up who should be what to try to get him the information. I want to make sure, are we to give all of that? I don't want to people get harmed, but we also want to be able to provide the proper assistance.
Yes, I mean, I think if you guys can, and I think he also knows is you know, he can't get everything from you guys. It doesn't mean that he still can't develop that plan. You know, he has to just describe what needs to be there and what that means and what the impact is to you guys of what that could say.
Okay.
But if there are, obviously, you know, you have the program for the library, and then you have maybe 1 or 2 goals from that, you know, and then what you're, and then just that feeding off of that, so you have the goals and a couple of tactics for how to do that, or just general things. And then
a lot of the financials are
Yeah, well, the financials we can share certain, so we can share the entire.
And if you just had the one financials for that and you just put X out, it doesn't even have to be legitimate. Like if you just want to put, because I know there's a lot of proprietary things for everybody to see. Right. And if you just say, you know, categorize things in a way to where you're not putting names or anything like that, but you can just lump sum it, that's totally fine too. So that's just going to give a snapshot of your organization. But again, if that's not something that you guys want to put in there, then you can still talk about it, talk about what needs to go there. So I'm working with him on that part. But it would be helpful as he's getting down the process, you know, to have those goals, the tactics, the needs associated with those tactics, and what you would assume the cost would be there. And then just a general revenue mix. That to really kind of help you guys figure out, oh, here's your diversity score, maybe you have it out to here, and then that way he can build these other things. Because if you guys don't have time or you don't really know who your individual donors, you know, if you don't want, he can just go in there with individual donor 1, individual donor 2, and then say, okay, you know, this is what we're hoping that they would give, and that sort of thing. And so he can map out the rest of it.
We don't know fully this category of who our donors are. We know we know the background of who the quality donor should be, but we don't know an actual name of it. So it's pretty much our readers, those who get these books, our parents of his kids, of those, you know, within a certain geographic area. But as far as individual, we don't know.
My statement to him would be, our goal is to increase individual donors, and our standard donor criteria looks like X, Y, Z. And so then he can also do some digging and thinking about, you know, some tactics for you guys to reach out to.
Because then once we get it profitable, we can.
So don't get into the weeds where it has to be like, oh my God, this is a huge thing. Just 1 or 2 things, especially on that program.
That's when we'll have.
If we get
the next
majority of the stuff running, it'll end up next week. Well, I know that the clock is ticking.
Yeah, I mean the class is over on the 29th.
Right.
So he has.
Is they sign it due freaking on the 29th?
It's pretty much due that weekend.
Okay.
So whatever you can get him, and then you just go around. Just so
travel.
I mean, it's all about, you know, financials, which we don't necessarily deal with.
So, and that's relatively close to where we go.
I know there's some of that stuff that you can pull from the web.
So right now we're in one over India.
So he can focus on that part. So just
too much political issues going on.
That's all. That's it.
A little bit, yeah.
Program specific. So the proprietary.
And plus the pollution's really bad. I was like, if we're going to,
you know,
I could probably do. We're going
that's our cause concern.
New Delhi.
To share that.
Right.
Pollution's so bad. There's no point.
And also why you want to diversify that.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. That totally makes sense. And he can focus on that part, and figure out strategies for diversity.
Yeah.
But yes, send what you have, and then I'll sit down with Jim and figure out how to.
We have pretty much all the
It's like 4 hours outside.
Yeah, and then he can pull that from the
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So now you get to do your pitch next week.
Is that what that is? What do I have to do? I tell me.
I'm going to send an email with this sheet, but it's just a 2-minute intro.
I need one. Okay. I send it fast.
Okay, okay.
And if I don't do it next week, I'll do it in front of a video.
Okay, and then we can
after the
upload.
wedding.
Yeah,
and
that'll
then-
work.
And you are going to help me.
Okay.
Would you do that?
Yes.
Okay. Only because I have a lot of shit on my plate right now. Just 300 people.
I know, oh gosh. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. We're gonna do it, I think it's in the fall, I think it's the second or third session. Maybe it's the second. So around October, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let me find out. I don't think we've decided, I don't think we've decided yet. So let me, okay, yeah, let me, because we'll send something out
They
for,
wore
so
they were
I'm
here,
gonna make a note of
and like
that.
got some looks, but it's okay.
So that we can put that in the schedule. You guys can let me
But once you can travel to
coming up.
India, like those countries, minus like the really rural, impoverished African countries. It wasn't really hard to do. Of established countries, is one of the
Are you talking about your pitch? So there's an app, there's a handout that tells you exactly what you're supposed to do. So I'm going to email that out to everybody again. Okay, so it's in one of your papers somewhere. It'll tell you how to lay it out. Okay, and then once we need to go down to everything. Yeah, it'll say open for a while. But yeah, I would download everything. Everything our strategic plan stuff is complete. So if you have, and so
yeah, I mean like
we're just going to add more stuff to the other presentations, but everything else is the same.
If you'll stay open, then it's
rural areas might be a little bit
Over everything, yes, okay. We'll warn you before we close it down. Okay. Yeah.
like they respect them and it's all fine.
for you, really.
I'm not there yet. I have a new Yeah. I'm like, I can't spell on Saturday mornings. That just jumbled in my head. But yeah, I want your presenting. I think Saturday.
But I did talk to her too. I didn't want to miss work to see him. Thank you. Oh man, this is like old. Are like government grants and contracts. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, we tailor it.
That's the musician.
I can't complain. How about you? Well, now everything's so good. Oh, actually, this came from every Saturday morning, surrounded by the friends. She said, well, I'm going to be there in a few weeks. It's like, you come to tea. Then I've seen Brian Cunningham, I think 5 times in the last 3 weeks. And I didn't know Brian until Don was kind of. Then I seen that all the Super Bowl events.
He was kind of on the committee itself, but on the entrepreneurship side of our organization, he had one of the businesses that came through our entrepreneurship actually had the trash, one for trash and one for something else, and one for food. Yeah,
he told me about the trash on that day when I showed up.
Yeah. It was incredible because I think too with the process of how things had to get done with the trash, you couldn't just go out anytime, you had to wait till certain time, so yeah, but people were
of course they were. Of course they were. But it was funny, so I was like running into him. I ran into her the other night. That's the black employee, black elected official.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be African American history celebration. Hey, what time did they finish?
I left early.
Did you?
I left
so,
early.
When I left, it was 8:30. Now see, was just coming.
He was just coming in.
I'm thinking, they still have 3 more panels to go. I don't know when they're going to recognize people. I was like, it is definitely political.
Yeah, most definitely. They did that. I was there. The last panel I saw was the one with Chair Tony.
Yeah,
Let him go
he
on.
just kept going. No, see, Tony said you had a minute and 30 seconds. And I think they heard him say you had 30 minutes.
He went on and on.
And I felt sorry for, what's the sister's name? The attorney? He cut her off. He said, okay, everybody, you done. Everybody else could go. I don't know if he let me go to the next panel.
Yeah, so they had a panel after that. I wasn't able to stay for that. I was like, man, that's bad optics.
I started saying, okay, if you're running for office, coming in, all and stuff like that. The head dog catcher, the vice mayor, dog pound. If I was Carlton, I didn't see anybody from this side. Just to see him out.
Yeah. He made it all the way to the end.
It's like Oscar
all the way
for
to the
everybody
end.
to go make their way.
Oh,
That's what it
I
seems
was seeing him rushing in the door. I helped him put on the jacket.
Yeah.
He said, I said, just talk to him. I said, wait there. He said, I'm on my way. But I saw him every once in a while.
I just think
I'm glad I went to get the food.
I did.
The line was long.
But it was good. We ran into a good amount of customers. So it was really good.
I saw
Let's start making our way back to our seats. We'll get started in about 1 minute.
Coming Thursday? Yes. It'll be a basketball. And it's a free event.
Look at that. That's right.
All right. Let's go ahead and take our seats. The next thing we're going to talk about, so you're at your presentation, and what can sometimes pop up are objections, and really how to shift our mindset and handle those objections in a professional way, in a productive way, to where it can end in a gift, or at least you know what sort of mechanism you need to employ to move on. So objectives, we're going to learn to cultivate that positive attitude, understand why objections happen. Again, sometimes things aren't always what they appear. Use objections to uncover hidden questions. And learn some basic strategies like the 6-step plan for dealing with resistance. So what are objections? What is an objection?
No.
No.
Hidden agenda.
United Way's
Hidden
a
agenda.
middleman.
That's good.
What's that?
United Way's a middleman. Why wouldn't we just give directly to the organization?
Bingo.
How much of every dollar goes to the community?
None. So I have a really awkward thing that I considered an objection where it was just awkward silence, and I felt like that was an objection because I was trying to continue a conversation and it just was like one-sided, and so I kind of decided to like close it, and I considered that an objection because I was like, he didn't engage in any, like there just wasn't there for him, and I kind of just, my instinct was like, okay, I'm gonna head out and see who else can open that door.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel like that brings me to the old adage, like, God gave you 2 years and 1 mouth. And it's, if they're sitting there silent, and once you make that ask, as awkward as it is, just sit there and wait. And it is the hardest
It is
thing
so
to do.
hard.
Realize, to just sit there and not like, okay, no, wait, is that not good? Because then you're projecting.
You're uncomfortable.
Right. And it's,
Yeah,
I'm asking
like-
for this, I'm confident in my ask, and
Yeah.
it's just let you know, respond, yay or nay.
Yeah.
Or maybe, and, where can you meet in the middle and
Yeah, no, I occasionally do that with Megan because she'll talk to me about stuff and I like very quiet, and then she'll.
No, then he just laughs, and I'm like, I am trying to interpret this laughter.
But she thinks it's, no, I'm like thinking about stuff about how am I going to do this, like for this class. When we were designing this class, we were talking about tools and techniques to help you guys do your work. And so, because I'm a thinker about how to best do this, I would be very quiet, and then she'll say, "How about doing this?" And I'll just start laughing, right? But it wasn't that I'm necessarily objecting to it. It's that I'm trying to find a way to do it in a way that's simple for you guys, and not make it too complicated, but also making sure that those spreadsheets give you the information, or at least have that process in there for you to go ahead and utilize them. Yeah. So sometimes although there's awkward silence, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean an objection. Is that the person may be thinking, okay, is this a possibility? Yes or no? And then it goes back to the strategies. What strategies can you use to get that person to switch?
And it's also if they say yes too quickly, you didn't answer enough. Because if it's okay, oh yeah, $25,000, I got that, not a problem. You want it to be a meaningful contribution that can okay, like yes or no, I can do this financially. Is it worth it with my philanthropic interest? If they say yes, that's okay, great. Let's make that a commitment over 10 years.
Yeah. Yes, a way to build.
Sometimes an objection isn't like a flat out no. It could be a hesitation, and that could be because they don't fully understand what you're telling them.
Yeah.
Like maybe you haven't gotten your points across fully, and if they're hesitating or voicing questions or concerns, maybe they just don't fully get it. And if you rephrase what it is you're trying to say, it might bring them back, and it might not be objection.
What's nice about what I'm hearing is that you guys do seem to have a positive take on an objection. Like, I don't know if it's human nature or just individual thing of saying, oh, I'm going to take this and turn it into
But a no could be different. A no sometimes.
Yeah.
Just a flat out no.
Yeah.
But where it's not a flat out no, there might be wiggle room depending on really listening to what they're saying
the why.
and regrouping it.
Their why.
I like to use the word, there must be a misunderstanding.
Yeah. Oh, you must have not understood what I said.
Yeah, but the subtext that you wore.
Did I say 25,000?
Because if yes, too fast, then I didn't.
So there must be a miscommunication. Help me understand again. I need to explain that.
Yeah. So redefining the objections, that attitude shift of it not being, objection is not a rejection. It could be all these different things which we're going to talk about. So it's also not a battle to be won. I think that's a good point of just saying it's a mutual cooperation. It gives you opportunities to strengthen your position, strengthen your impact statements and all these other things, and your evidence and all these other tools that you've been developing and figuring out how it's going to resonate with that specific donor. And really it goes back to the needs discovery too about that donor, like what's happening in their lives. So what objections really are, they reveal their interests. They can also reveal their true feelings. Object when you haven't answered to their questions, to your point there, of like maybe there is a misunderstanding or you're just missing that, connecting the dots for them specifically. And some objections are nothing more than stalls. They just want a little bit more time or something else that's going to resonate with them to make them take that leap. So why donors object? The objection to your organization or cause. Maybe they don't think that your organization is being run effectively, and there's some things that you can answer there to ease their mind. Or maybe there's something about your cause specifically that doesn't resonate, and there's a way that you can repurpose it or repurpose your message that will. The objection to the fundraiser, maybe there's something specifically about you or something they've heard about you or whatever and it's not something that they're going to come out and say, I don't like you, but I think it's important for us to be astute about, our behaviors and how that social interaction and how somebody's responding to us. Like if I'm a fast talker and they're like, it could be too overpowering, it could be too aggressive for some folks, and you hope, we're not perfect human beings, we all have our personalities, But then it's also knowing when you possibly need to step back and somebody else needs to step in that can be a better fit for that person. And that's why the two of us are up here, right?
We like you both, though.
I know. It's not, we won't compete.
But I do have the better bow tie on.
Yeah. Okay, now, I got you. Looking pretty fierce today, Sal. Don't hate. I know. That's right. But they don't like making decisions. They have an aversion. Maybe that's just where they want to stall, and they just can't quite get themselves over the hump. They object to the gift amount, and to the point whether it's maybe a quick yes or whatever it might be, there's something that they had in their mind, but it's also having that conversation with them so that you're not leading the witness, so to speak. You know, you're following their lead. And it's not personal. You know, again, you know, everybody has their own thing that they're bringing to the table, and it's not saying that you're not good at what you do, you don't know your information, that you're not passionate about your cause. This has nothing to do with you as an individual person. And it's hard because we're so connected to our cause and to what we're doing, and it's such a personal thing.
If they don't like you,
well, they may not like you.
I mean, nobody's supposed to, not everybody's supposed to like you.
Yeah.
I respect those boundaries. I mean, we're not supposed to be friends with everybody. Sorry, I pitched thing.
No, and I don't. And I cannot write the fundraiser and still want to give to the cause.
Right.
I mean,
She's right. I mean, they may still want to give.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they may still not want to give. They may love you but not want to give them.
Yeah. Right.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So the types of objections, the stall. When donors offer a stall or a put off, they put their words aren't a full representation of exactly how they're feeling. So they're not going to come out and say, "Oh, I'm waiting for this." It's that sensitivity that you need to have with that engagement to read them and know when the timing's right for that ask. The searcher, the one that is looking for more information, more evidence, and that hidden request. Something that they're not saying, but that's there that you need to keep searching for in order to deliver. That hidden objection, third type of resistance, can be difficult to identify and overcome. These are objections defined as hidden problems or unspoken hesitations. It's not addressed, and it can delay or prevent a gift. The best course of action for dealing with these is to treat it like a searcher objection, ask a few more questions, get them to speak to you, and then eventually you can kind of dissect what they're saying or what they're really needing from that engagement. And the stopper, the flat out legitimate reasons why they're unable to give. Maybe their money's held up somewhere, or there's something that's timing wise, and that and it can be potentially legitimate, but it also gives you an opportunity to be creative. Like if they are, I'm saving money for my kids to go to college. Well, maybe there's something that you guys can do creatively together where it can be a win-win for your organization and for them to still do the things that they're wanting to do financially for their family. So tips for negotiating objections. The feel, felt, found. I mean, if anybody's been in any therapy, I think we know. You have that feel. I can understand how you feel. I have had other donors who felt that way until they found out this. So having that kind of statement in your head about what you can say when you're hearing something back from a donor or a potential donor. Because first and foremost, if we can start any conversation with affirming what we've heard from that other individual, then you're going to be, have your best foot forward. Compensate or counterbalance. Maybe you're going to use one of their statements as a way to lead into something else that you have. Like their negative could be a positive. And then ask why. I think there's a professional way to ask why. I think a lot comes into the nonverbals, your tone, but I think it's fair to get them to elaborate what their position is. deny the objection. Like if you know for certain what they're saying is not true. Like if they have a feeling about, you know, the data or the stats or something or your impact, and you know that you have something to counter it, then counter it with your, you know, no, I'm sorry you were misinformed, or maybe I represent, you know, maybe I said that incorrectly, actually XYZ. The boomerang. So flipping, let's see. You agree with prospects while showing them that their objections need not prevent a commitment. Like, oh yeah, I can see that. However, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's still not going to impact this end result. And curiosity, just asking a lot more developmental questions about where their position is. Like, tell me a little bit more about that. And answer with visuals. You know, you have that bringing it back to the why, you know, that nice testimonial video or something that's going to capture whatever their objection is. And again, going back to your units of conviction, you know, when you're developing these for your particular program or service, when you get to the evidence component or the benefit component, you know, again, lay that out as we laid out your strategic plans through your outcomes and your outputs. What is it for the individual? What is it for the organization? What is it for the community? So that you have those different elements to touch on when you're out there. And then timing, you know, again, you know, we're not perfect human beings, but, you know, if we can be in a moment instead of thinking about what you want to say and when you're going to say it and being ahead of the moment, being in a moment allows you to anticipate what's happening right now. Answer it immediately and get out of the way. I think it's, you know, address their objection, and then it might follow with an uncomfortable silence that, you know, you just have to sit there. I mean, you've done your part, you've addressed it, and then you have to let the donor say it. Postpone an answer until later so you can present more benefits. You know, you never want to deliver inaccurate information. So if you hear something and you hear the objection and in your mind you're like, that doesn't sound right, then go back and figure out, okay, how can I demonstrate that this wasn't true? And then, you know, package that and put that back together so that when you present and go to your next meeting, that you can give them that accurate information. And do not answer an excuse. 6-step plan for handling objections. Listen and hear them out. Listening, learning to listen is not difficult. It's just something that, again, it's not difficult, but it's hard to do. You know, because we all have our objectives for communicating and conversations, and again, allowing ourselves to be organic and being in a moment and hearing specifically what the other person is saying and what their needs are. Confirm your understanding. I hear you say, or I feel this. Acknowledge their point of view to show concern for their feelings and practice empathy. Select a specific technique. Pick the one that fits you, the situation, and the donor. And then answer their objections respectfully, professionally, and then, you know, again, you might have to go back later, but, you know, answer succinctly and be confident in your responses. Attempt to close. After answering their objection, ask for the gift again. And then the cycle will continue. You have to hear, and it's a very, again, reciprocal kind of engagement on hearing what, if you know, for whatever reason answering their objection did not answer their objection, then again you may need to ask more questions and go back through that cycle. So now everybody pair up, but pair up with somebody that's not with your organization. So when you pair up, I want you, yeah.
The whole table.
I know. We're going to switch you guys up. So think about a few realistic examples in your organization of like objections that you've heard in your own meetings or ones that you might think would come up and how you would address it. and then role play with each other. And the other person, be real, be a realistic donor. Like if you were going to give to this organization. There we go. Okay. We're mixing you two ladies up. Mix it up. And I don't exactly.
Exactly what I was thinking.
That's why
Thank you, but now I
So, in these conversations, did you guys try different stall techniques? Like different techniques of saying no? No. No? You're just like, no. You're just the stopper. Done. Did any of these negotiating tactics resonate with you?
Yes.
Which ones? Who wants to show? Yeah?
I have a question.
Yeah?
Just you asked me, like, you know, how do I show the rejection? Not
Yeah.
well, not just kidding.
I know.
No, but this is not necessarily a rejection. I had a big donor that wanted to work, since from the moment they met us, like, oh, we want to work with you, we want to at least talking, and give us opportunities. Yeah, I want to do it, I want to do it, I want to do it. They want to sponsor my event. I definitely want, yes, yeah, give us a deadline, and the money's not coming in. And yes, I do want to do it, I do want to do it. 3 weeks, for a month before the event, I'm sorry I can't do sponsorship, but I could do a donation to the raffle item. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, yes, that was great, thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. When can I pick up? Sure, let's coordinate. Okay. 2-3 weeks before the event. Hi, you know, this is my schedule for this week, blah, blah, blah. Can I pick up the item? Nothing. 2 weeks before the event. Yes, we still want to work with you. Wow.
Then you're like,
can I
hi, this is me outside your door.
So 2 weeks, 1 week, 3 days before the event, I'm like, I'm the only one doing that part of it. And I have to coordinate with sometimes volunteers to help me out. And nothing. It's like, and I'm like, so what was all this 3 months of talking that you wanted to work with us? But how do I reapproach that person? How do I say, I can't say thank you so much because you don't do anything, but, you know, how do I, you know,
yeah, I mean, just, look, there's,
how well it
yeah.
went and how many people attended and, you know, it would be a great opportunity for you. I mean, they're all so big, they don't really need us, but it would be a good partnership for us.
Yeah, I mean, so there's several. She's asking a question. So there's several ways. I mean, one is that you can always say, listen, we're depending on your donation, your contribution, because we're expecting you to help, right? So you tell them why that person, he's giving you a commitment, right? It's like when I give a commitment to an individual or to an organization, they come back and say, Sal, we're expecting you to contribute, right? You have to make it so that their contribution is, one, meaningful, and that they're also made a commitment to you verbally, saying, you know, because it's their word on the line as well, right? So you have to convince that person, listen, because of your contribution, we took on these responsibilities, right? Because we're depending upon you to come through. The other approach is what we said earlier. You know what? If they keep saying yes, 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 and yes, and don't deliver, then you just sever that relationship. Say, you know what? Thank you very much. We'll see you later.
But I think it's also addressing that, you know, potential, maybe there was a misunderstanding. We had this impression that you were going to do X, Y, Z. What could we have done differently and start, you know, bridging that gap a little bit more, because it just sounds like they were just stall.
Yeah.
3
months, yeah, that's a long time.
And at some point, yeah, no more open-ended thing. No, like, when can we? It's like, oh, I'm going to be there here this day, and let's meet up here, and just create that where that funnel just gets shorter and shorter to where this is what I'm getting at. And if it's not going to happen at that point, then it runs into, well, you know, we took on these additional responsibilities according to your gift pledge. You know, we weren't able to.
We use a deadline to be in the program. Like, we really want to get you in the program.
Yeah.
And then if they miss it, they're not in.
We put the pressure as well, nothing.
Yeah.
But I think to your point is you come up with your deadlines and you stick to them. And there are ways of reminding folks that you are serious. You don't have time to tiptoe around so much without being rude and putting it nicely. But say, well, you know, even if it is that the deadline for this event has closed, then I will be sure to reach out to you for the next event. And then hopefully that person, because folks are busy, and so
like, how can you make it easier for them?
If the closing approach of saying, like, I'm going to show up at this day, can you make this work? And then for the next time, they're going to know you're serious, and they're going to show up if they're really, if they mean it, that they want to participate.
that was I guess the breaking point when I said, like, this is a deadline, and then they were like, okay, we can't do the event, but we'll give you something for the raffle item.
Well, and gratefully you finally got that piece of information, because if not, they were going to stall that out even closer.
Well, we didn't get any raffle items either.
Yeah. Right. And see, so a little technique I learned when I was still active with the Air Force. They said that you send a message out saying, we already received our gift from Honda. We've already received our gift from Barnes & Noble. We've already received X, Y, and Z from this organization. We're looking forward to your contribution as well on this date. Now you're reminding them, but you're also jonesing them to let them know that you're not the only one in this party.
Well, and they're going to miss their promotional opportunities to be on your program or whatever else it might be. Anybody else? Okay. All right. This is going to do our introduction.
Yes, so without further ado, we have a very special guest. We have Tony Bell, who is the director of the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. So let's have a big, warm welcome.
thunder and applause. I'm a little intimidated. It's great to see you. Thank you for inviting me up here.
Absolutely.
I have trouble, keeping my passion in this little space, so I probably won't stand at the podium very much if that's okay with you guys. So it's great to be here. Tony Bell, how are you? It's good to see you. Tony Bell's Director of Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. I live here in Broward County in Fort Lauderdale. I started my fundraising career 20 years ago here in Broward County. And just what a great community. How are you? What a great community. I can see so many familiar faces. This is so great. Usually I don't see so many familiar faces. So I had the real pleasure of taking on the role of Director of the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy back in July of 2019. So again, really thrilling for me to step into this room today and see so many people at our Fundraising Academy on a Saturday. So, I mean, really, big kudos to you guys for making that kind of, investment in your professional development and that kind of investment in your organizations. So I'm, again, super passionate about this work. Is the graph the next thing if I hit this little, yay, okay. So really all I'm going to talk about is cost selling and what that really kind of means in today's nonprofit space, right? We knew at Sanford Institute of Philanthropy that we were being just a little bit disruptive when we used the term cost selling, right? Because a lot of fundraisers don't like to think that they are selling something when you're out there, raising money for your organization. So I challenge you to rethink the definition of selling. So I look at it two ways, right? Selling means that, I'm giving you X number of dollars and you're giving me, these red shoes, right? So there's that kind of transactional selling, right? But then there's the selling of a concept, an idea, a solution. And that's really what you're selling when we talk about cost selling. You're out in the community selling a solution, right? So I just wanted, to kind of frame that because I know a lot of folks struggle with that kind of terminology. When I started fundraising 20 years ago, it came directly from a place of passion, right? I had spent 13 years with American Express, great organization to work for, right? Tremendous values, really encourage employees to participate in the communities that we live and work in. So through that experience, and then I was in Chicago at the time, and then offering me opportunities to serve on boards, to represent the organization of corporate roundtables, that's where I got really, really passionate about the nonprofit sector, because I got to see what these organizations were doing, understand their infrastructure. I mean, at that time, I thought everybody volunteered for nonprofits. I didn't know you could actually have a career, in the nonprofit sector, right? Giving back to community was always important to my family. My dad was a volunteer fireman, so we were always, just very active in the community. So that was ingrained in me. But it was really working with those nonprofits through American Express that I got so super passionate about the nonprofit sector. So when I started fundraising 20 years ago, there weren't great tools like Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, right? So I stepped into the nonprofit space with, great customer service skills and tremendous passion. I understood relationships, but I didn't understand this relationship process, right? So 20 years ago, I was like, we're doing great work, want to give us money? We're doing great work, want to give us money? I mean, I would walk up to every single one of you at Publix and be like, we're doing great work, want to give us money? Well, I'm standing there waiting for my Italian sub. I'm like, you want to give us money? Right? Because I didn't understand, what it really meant to prospect and research and cultivate, before I actually made the ask. Again, we're doing great work. Don't you want to give us money? That was my approach. I didn't know any better. I mean, I've made all kinds of mistakes. I could tell you that I could stand here an hour and tell you about those. So that's why I love this graph so much. And you may have seen this in some of the other, have they seen this before? No. And anything yet? No? Okay, super. So what I love about this is it kind of, it challenges us again to rethink kind of what the traditional model of asking looks like compared to the cost-selling relationship model of asking. So this blue box, so this was me, right? I spent very little time, prospecting approach, identifying donor needs. I was here. I was closing long and hard all the time, right? Spending 40% of my time just trying to close, and probably 90%, 80 to 90% of the time getting a no. Because I didn't know anything about the people I was asking, right? So So with the relationship, driven model, we spend most of our time doing that pre-work and less of the time asking. Because now, by the time I get in front of someone and I'm making the ask, I know something about them. I know where their passion points are. I probably know their capacity to give. I know what other organizations they're supporting. I just know so much more about them. So that again, I'm spending less time asking, I'm asking more of the right people, and my return on those asks are much greater than in the traditional model. Part of the challenge with this structure, quite frankly, are our board of directors and sometimes our CEOs and executive directors. Right? So, and I say that again just from my experience and just the traditional way of thinking. There's a reason why these jobs are called development. Right? Because we are developing relationships, we're developing opportunities to get resources for our organizations. So, I had some senior leadership where, you're spending too much time in the office. Well, I'm doing my research now. I'm really trying to identify who are the right people for me to set appointments with to go out, to meet with. So, sometimes there's a little bit of a struggle with your leadership. I get that. For you to convince them that you really need that time to do your research and your prospecting. So anyway, I just wanted to show this graph because I think it's really important and again kind of shows the tremendous difference between how you're investing your time in the traditional fundraising model and how you invest your time in a cost-selling, relationship-driven model. Let's see, what else? That was pretty fast, but I wanted to make sure I talked about that. So tell me, because this again, I don't get this opportunity in front of our cohorts very often. This program's been implemented now for about 5 years around the country. NOVA's one of 17 affiliates that help us make sure that this curriculum is available to the local communities. It's really geared towards emerging fundraisers, folks in 1 to 5 years of their career. But what I say to everyone, especially when I'm facilitating these workshops, is that my desire is that you get at least one of two things happens, right? So one is you walk out of here with this incredible new knowledge and these aha moments and things that you can implement in your organizations tomorrow that really change the way that you're fundraising and really deliver a greater ROI on your investment. Or that you walk out of here going, all right, I'm doing everything I should be doing, and you're getting that affirmation that you're on the right track. I mean, there's nothing wrong with investing some professional development time and then walking away going, I got this, right? Because we don't always feel like we got this, right? Because it's hard work, and it takes a lot of effort before you see some of those wins, right? So investing your time in professional development is certainly a win. So share with me, please, because I could tell you guys aren't shy, because I sat in the back of the room for a little bit, but I really would love to hear from you guys. What is this number 3? How many classes so far? Wow. Wow. Wow, I'm way behind. So 6 classes, so I mean I can already tell you've got great instructors, great presenters. How's the experience been?
We need to leave the room.
What's that?
We'll leave the room.
Oh, no. I want you to hear it, right? Because what do? We praise in public, we punish in private. So I want you to be here to hear this. So I love that you good feedback. The cohort experience is really important, and what you guys learn from one another, in this space as well. And the relationships, right? I look at this, have any of you been through like Leadership Fort Lauderdale or Leadership Broward? Or,
Not yet.
yeah, so you go through those, Leadership Florida, Leadership Broward. You're friends with that class, for the rest of your life, for the rest of your career. So, that's what's exciting about the cohort is you're going to develop those kinds of relationships. So I know, like, there's a whole, are all of you from PACE? Was it like, okay.
PACE here.
PACE here. We have quite a few United Way folks also. Okay, great. And then SOS. So, try not to sit next to each other all the time. If you could, if you could do that, just so you can develop some other relationships. So you're having a great experience. Anything specific about the curriculum that you particularly enjoy? Is there a good balance of kind of, you know, exercises and good time for you guys to, you know, to interact?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because we try to make sure we built all of that in.
I really like how it takes you through the strategic fundraising plan, and each week is a different section.
Good.
And having the spreadsheet with formulas already put in, it's nice and easy for us. We just put in our own individual organization information, and gets really helpful. And I know there are a lot of different ways to do strategic planning, and it's awesome to learn another one to add to the portfolio and really see how the different planning methodologies compare and play out.
Mm-hmm. Great, that's good feedback. Excellent. Anybody else? Yeah, hi.
Hi. Actually, having two instructors with different skill sets has been really nice because they've been playing off of each other's strengths really well, and I found that to be very helpful.
That's great feedback because we don't often have that opportunity in some of the cohorts for there to be two facilitators like that, and so that's great to hear. Kudos. What else? Yeah.
I just personally thought today's session was phenomenal.
Right.
For me, it was just eye-opening, and I would love to delve more into what we did today.
Okay.
If possible.
Well, excellent. Well, you know that we have, you know, on the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy website, we have all of the national webinars that we've done in a library that's available to you, of course, free of charge. So you can always go back to some of those, and you'll get some different perspectives from those presenters, and some interesting, especially at the end when the webinar attendees are, you know, sending in questions and we're doing the Q&A at the end. It may give you some, you know, some additional deeper insight into some of these topics.
Thank you.
Oh, of course. Oh, thank you. Hi.
Hi. I think also what has been very beneficial, while it might be for emerging fundraisers, but I think the idea that there are larger organizations such as ourselves, United Way, and so on, and then really brand new 1- and 2-person organizations. And so I think that's really a good kind of thing for larger organizations to learn about perhaps the, I don't know, struggles or things that emerging organizations are finding as they find their way. And then conversely, you know, so I just think it's a good mix of not just years doing it, the breadth and scope of
Yeah, no, great point, and again, the huge value of the cohort, right? And a lot of times the younger grassroots nonprofits are filling some void that the larger organizations have not yet had an opportunity to address. So the potential for collaboration and collective impact that comes out of these types of convenings is amazing. I mean, we've seen that with some of the cohorts too, where, you know, two organizations that didn't really know each other got to know each other, and then the next thing you know, they're partnering on initiatives and solving, you know, more problems than they were initially for the community. So thanks for mentioning that, because you're right. Aside from just the tenure and experience, there's the difference in the size of the organizations. Super. Any other feedback? Great. So, oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, it just I was extremely impressed and has been for my tenure is the amazing amount of diversity that's in this room.
I noticed that too.
And the wealth of the knowledge that I've gained from being with the diversity of the level of experience, whether they be from just starting out to being well versed. And it has really brought my skills in the whole field of nonprofit.
Excellent.
So it's been just
Good. This is also good for me to hear, because I'll be back. I fly back and forth to San Diego like every other week now, because that's where the headquarters is. So grateful JetBlue is a nonstop. But this is great, because I'll be back there next week, and this is just great, you know, great feedback for me to share with the Chancellor and with Denny if I get to see him.
So, since you do travel so much, could you, in a macro sense, talk about the dynamics of philanthropy in the South Florida area versus other metropolis such as San Diego or Boston, and specifically the changes taking place here? You know, Wayne has died, Marty's gone, Terry Stiles, some of our giants of philanthropy in the community have died, and there's some people who are sort of stepping in to take their places. But I guess, could you kind of give your view of the state of philanthropy in South Florida right now?
Sure. So, I mean, as it compares to the rest of the country, the challenges and needs are all the same, is what I've recognized, right? Everybody, so this is a safe space, right? We can say things that are, okay. Well, that's okay. That's okay. But, you know, everyone has issues with boards and board participation, especially around the topic of fundraising. So that's not unique to any market. There is a lack of skilled development professionals across the country. And I think we have that same issue in South Florida. There is very little upward mobility within the sector, within the organizations that you're working for, right? So that's why we see such a revolving door, not only in South Florida, but again across the country. Because if you want to make more money, you want more responsibility, you want to have a greater impact on your community, sometimes that means having to leave the organization that you're working, you know, that you're working for. When it comes to kind of the legacy donors, the same thing. I mean, we're seeing that across the country as well, where these legacy donors are passing on. Now we're in our community, right? So at least like you know, Teddy Morris is kind of picking up and you know, and moving on the family legacy. So in our community, we have some of, you know, some of the kids of those legacy donors really picking up the torch and moving it forward. Otherwise, it's, you know, just working harder to diversify your fundraising stream so that they're not so reliant on these larger kind of single gift, you know, single gifts to sustain the organization. So I'm not really seeing anything unique out there that isn't happening here. It's very interesting to me that the challenges are the same everywhere. They really, really are. Did that help? Was that? No. Yeah. That's what I've noticed. There are, you know, I will say there are some areas where just some seem to like have their act together a little more, and I haven't really figured out why that is. So I'll come back to you once I kind of figure out why that why that is. Actually, in the Midwest, they seem to have a little more, and I don't know if that's just kind of the culture, you know. So just. So that's what I've kind of noticed. Yes, sir.
So with the changing dynamics of like, the population, and I guess, you know, people my generation, maybe younger, more socially oriented, what do you think the future holds for like millennials or Gen Z in the nonprofit world? Like what opportunities are out there to get more of the younger generation involved in philanthropic or, you know, nonprofit opportunities?
Okay, so I think the first gap there is we have to pay people what they're worth, and not be afraid to, you know, to pay people what they're worth and the value that they're bringing to an organization. So I think that serves as a huge barrier for, you know, millennials, Gen Xers to want to get in this space, right? I'm super passionate about causes, and I want to do really great work. But, you know, I mean, I want to be able to provide for my family. I mean, just the things that anybody would think about, right? So I think that that's kind of a barrier. But on the positive side, there's just tons of opportunities. I mean, there are development positions all over the place. You know, so for anyone that's willing to kind of take that leap of faith and you know, realize that there are probably other things that they could do that will make them more money, there's just lots and lots of opportunity. And more opportunities like this for professional development where they, you know, if they're new to the space or aren't doing fundraising at all, you know, they could come attend a fundraising academy and get a certificate and at least be able to go to a nonprofit and say, I went through this course, here's my certificate in fundraising, and, you know, if you give me an opportunity, I know what to do. Yeah, so yeah, I hope that helps. Sorry, yeah.
Tony, one of our speakers talked about the advent of the change in cause selling completely, going towards the mobile, you know, social media kind of thing, and conventional fundraising going down the tubes. What's your?
Well, I don't know that fundraising. I don't know that it's going to go down.
Well, he kind of indicated that.
Go down the tubes. I think that social media eventually. Well, I don't. You know, with artificial intelligence entering the space, I mean, I think that there is, I don't ever see it going down the tubes, right? I see these kind of things as opportunities and new tools in our toolbox, right? To help us kind of diversify the ways in which we're raising money for our organizations. I don't see any one kind of model taking over the sector. I really think that, you know, for a while now, you know, this is the deal, is this relationship-driven approach, and you know, and really spending your time in developing relationships with your donors, and looking at it as less of a transaction, and really more of a relationship. But yeah, but it's going to be very interesting to see what artificial intelligence, you know, plays in all of that. Are you guys familiar with a woman named Beth Cantor? So Beth Cantor is a leader in the nonprofit space when it comes to technology, and she does a lot of great posts around artificial intelligence and what that might look like for the sector. If you go to the Stanford Institute of Philanthropy website, she did a great webinar. She wrote a book called The Happy Healthy Nonprofit. So it's a lot about self-care in the nonprofit sector, but she also is very passionate about the technology side too, because she started in the technology business. So she does a lot of tweets and posts about what's new and exciting in the technology space as it relates to nonprofits. So if you want someone else to follow on Twitter or Instagram, Beth Cantor would be one that I would recommend. So what other questions? Yeah.
So I guess in a more like entrepreneurial vein, so there's a lot of nonprofits now in the space, and it seems like there's always this argument of like what impact is being made, and is it sometimes better to join an existing movement rather than, you know, maybe start something else that's already being covered? And I just want to know your take on maybe the consolidation of nonprofits in the future when it starts to be more specialized, like people who are best at helping in that particular space really take the lead, and the other people either, you know, absorb into that, or I don't know, just like some thoughts of some other nonprofit people and kind of consolidation of the nonprofits.
Right, yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, and there, it was funny because I can't say specifically who, but I was talking to the CEO of a pretty large nonprofit here in Broward County the other day, and they said to me, you know, let me know if you hear of any nonprofits we're looking to acquire. So they were like in acquisition mode, which I thought was very interesting. You know, so that's all I'll say about that. I even need to learn more about, you know, what their motivation is. But they were totally in acquisition mode, which is not typically the kind of terminology that you hear, right, in this sector. But I've been, you know, so before I signed on with National University System, and you know, and this gig as the director of the Institute of Philanthropy, for the last year I've had, last 9 years, pardon me, I've had my consulting business, Mr. Nonprofit, and I get a lot of folks that call me and want to start a 501c3, and I try and talk them out of it. Well, you know, first, you know, I run the, have you check, you know, is what you're trying to put in the marketplace, is it redundant? Is someone else already doing this? You know, can you take your resources to them as opposed to creating a different, you know, additional competition? So I typically, you know, if I have that, if I'm at that intersection with them and can guide them towards the lane of collaboration, you know, with an existing organization versus creating competition, that's typically where I will send them. But again, you know, I think there's a reason why there are various cancer organizations, right? And I think there's a reason why there are various HIV/AIDS organizations, and there's a reason why there are different cystic fibrosis organizations. And that's because I just think, you know, the needs are so great and so diverse that it's hard for one organization to really effectively meet the needs of any one given, you know, population that has needs within those spaces. But yeah, but it's funny you asked that, because it was a very interesting phone call about them looking to, you know, acquire some nonprofits. One second.
Do you feel us making any headway with the overhead argument across the country?
Oh man, Dan Pallotta, my hero. So are you guys familiar with Dan Pallotta? Oh my gosh, I got to work with him on the AIDS rides, the Minneapolis to Chicago AIDS rides. So, and Dan would literally sit around the campfire with his guitar. You know, I don't know if he's a great singer-songwriter too. We have to be the change in that.
How do you spell this last name, please?
P-A-L-L-O-T-A. Might be
Thank
two
you.
T's. I might be wrong there. But yeah, Dan Pilato. Watch his TED Talk on overhead in the nonprofit sector. We have to be the change agents there, and we have to be the ones that are pushing that message. I think it's just total BS that we have to worry about that. You know, quite frankly, we are running businesses, right? The only thing that separates us from Nike, except maybe $1 billion, is our tax status. It's the only thing that separates us from Nike is our tax status, right?
Are you seeing things changing in other parts of the country?
Well, yeah, and I think it comes from the younger philanthropists that get that you need talent to solve problems, right? Because that's what our organizations are doing. We are solving problems, and you need people with talent to do that. And so and talent, and you have to be able to invest in the talent to do that. So we have to be the ones, and we have to do that unapologetically, right? Not all like, I'm about to say this, I hope it doesn't offend you. Excuse me, but being like, this is the deal, right? Is that our leadership and the folks that we have working for us, I don't want to say deserve, but we need to invest in them appropriately in order to see the kind of outcomes that we hope to bring to our community. So again, I think it's shifting slowly. Yeah.
So I just started working with a nonprofit, but something I'm seeing come up for fundraising that it's not necessarily long-term and sustainable for asking for money every year from people, because someone may drop off, someone may give to something else, stuff like that.
Right.
So do you see any solutions to creating long-term, sustainable ways to fund a nonprofit or charitable organization?
Yeah, so that's what makes the work so challenging, you're right, is that we have to continuously have this pool of potential donors, right, to go to. I mean, some organizations are doing really well with social enterprise initiatives, right? Something as simple, a lot of nonprofits have great thrift stores that are thriving and generating revenue. Some organizations are providing programs where they can charge for the program, so they're generating dollars for that. I think it really depends on the organization, but I've yet to see any real clear one-size-fits-all model that's going to do away from our necessity to continue to work with individual donors. Not that I've seen, that again, that's one-size-fits-all. So like ARC Broward does, they've got probably four, I'm going to get it wrong, but 4 or 5 different social enterprises that they're running that generate a lot of dollars to sustain the organization. But that works, and they're employing their clients in the process, so that's a huge win-win for them. But I think they're a unique scenario, especially in South Florida. Did you have a question?
When you said that the only difference between nonprofits and Nike is just tax status, it made me think of Andres' blog, nonprofitaf.com.
Oh yes, I'm very familiar.
There is an article, imagine if Apple had to run like a nonprofit.
Yes, right.
And I mean things like $700 for the iPhone. I want most of this on direct costs, no staff salaries, and I want to report at the end of the quarter.
I'm glad you brought that up.
How this $700 was spent, and just reading through all these different examples.
He's hysterical. I saw him speak at a conference. He's really, really funny.
What is it? Nonprofitaf.com.
Yes,
The
yes.
Valentine's Day one, for example.
And you could tell by his domain name that he's unapologetic.
Yes.
About
and it's all stuff I want to share on LinkedIn, but I feel like that might.
It just depends on if you want to be a disruptor in the space or not, right?
So like Valentine's Day, or like nonprofit pickup line for Valentine's Day. Is your name cash flow, because you're always on my mind.
Oh my God. That's hysterical. So as you can tell, I mean, I didn't really come here today with some prepared speech to give you, right? I just wanted to, share with you, what I think is a pretty compelling graphic about the differences in the way that you invest your time with traditional fundraising as related to the cost selling model, to get some feedback, because I don't often get the opportunity to be in front of our cohorts and hear about your experience, and then to just do a Q&A. So we kind of did that.
Thank you.
That's all awesome. I mean, I still have a few more minutes. I don't have to, unless, if you have any other questions, anything general about the sector or any specific challenges, I've always got opinions.
Well, as we're talking about investing time and doing your moves management and how much time you invest in one donor or another, I had a little pushback from my executive director because I was giving a good chunk of time to the president of a family foundation that just gave us a $25,000 grant, and that was our first grant from them. And because I'm in a botanical garden and wildlife sanctuary, I have a lot of fun show and tell stuff, and I know she loves animals.
Where are you?
At Flamingo Gardens.
Oh, Keith is there, right? Keith
Oh,
Clark?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
I
you
know
know
Keith from the 80s.
So we were talking. Oh, the stories you must have.
Tell him I said that.
I will. So we were talking about
It's
that.
a small world, you guys.
So we were talking